The ring made a sound no one in Caldermere Park could mistake. It touched the white breakfast plate with one small, final note of porcelain and sapphire, soft enough that the footman near the sideboard might have pretended not to hear it, yet sharp enough to cut through 8 years of silence. Yorkshire, 1884, had woken under a thin grey morning, the kind that pressed against the tall windows and turned the silver service cold before the tea had finished steaming. Rosamund Atherley, Duchess of Caldermere, sat alone at the long breakfast table beneath portraits of women who had married into power and learned, in different centuries, what power expected from a wife. Her place had been set at the far end, as always. His Grace's chair stood opposite hers, empty as a verdict. The Duke had ridden out before dawn to inspect the western farms, though the steward could have managed the matter without him. He had left no note. He rarely did. Beside Rosamund's plate rested 3 unopened invitations, all addressed to the Duchess of Caldermere in a hand she recognized as belonging not to friends, but to households that wished to be seen in the orbit of a duke. Across the table, where Sebastian should have been, lay a folded memorandum in the Dowager Duchess's decisive writing. It listed which dinners Rosamund would attend, which charities she would patronize, which widows she would call upon, and which London family she would avoid. The paper did not ask whether she wished any of it. It did not need to. Caldermere Park had never learned to ask Rosamund questions. It had learned only to place duties before her and expect her to swallow them with weak tea. Her right hand rested near the cup, the sapphire ring catching a pale stripe of window light. It was a magnificent thing, too large for tenderness, too cold for comfort, set with a deep blue stone surrounded by diamonds from some long-dead Atherley bride. Sebastian had placed it on her hand at the altar without trembling. He had looked grave, handsome, and correct, as though marrying her were one more obligation that a duke must perform with dignity. She had been 22 then, the second daughter of the late Earl of Fairholt, trained to accept that a good marriage was not always a warm one. She had believed warmth might come later. It had not. The room was still enough that she heard voices beyond the half-open door. Not servants. Servants knew how to pass like shadows. This voice belonged to Augusta Atherley, Dowager Duchess of Caldermere, a woman who could make pity sound like etiquette and cruelty sound like tradition. His Grace has no time to soothe her nerves, Augusta said. If Rosamund is wise, she'll remember that a duchess doesn't need happiness. She needs to remain useful and quiet. Another woman murmured an answer. Mrs. Vale, perhaps, the housekeeper, or Miss Spenlow, the Dowager's secretary. Rosamund did not turn her head. She only looked at the surface of her tea, where the cream had formed a thin skin because no one had remembered that she never drank it once it cooled. She has been quiet for years, Your Grace, the softer voice said. Then she should have no difficulty continuing, Augusta replied. The Caldermere name is not a shawl to be thrown off when a woman feels chilled. I shall decide which appearances are necessary. His Grace trusts me in these matters. The word settled over the room with the familiar weight of a locked door. His Grace trusts me. Not his wife. Not the woman who had sat through harvest dinners, political calls, charity committees, and long London evenings with a smile so controlled it had begun to feel carved into her face. Not the woman who knew which tenants had lost sons, which old ladies needed coal sent before the first frost, which footmen hid a limp after carrying trays for 12 hours. His Grace trusted his mother because his mother was efficient, and Rosamund had made the mistake of being graceful in pain. That was the danger of quiet dignity. If a woman bore neglect beautifully enough, everyone called it peace. Rosamund lowered her gaze to the ring. It had never fit properly. The jeweller had offered to adjust it after the wedding, but Augusta had said Caldermere brides learned to carry Caldermere jewels. Sebastian had said nothing. Rosamund had smiled. She had learned to curl her fingers in a way that kept the ring from slipping. She had learned 100 such small adjustments. She had learned to speak after others had finished. She had learned to thank her husband for escorting her to balls where he left her near a column and discussed drainage, elections, or horseflesh with other men. She had learned that being a duchess could be very like being a portrait, admired for position and ignored as a person. Across the room, the footman shifted his weight. Poor Martin. He was young, perhaps 19, with red ears and a desperate wish not to witness anything important. Rosamund almost smiled at him. She had always been kind to servants because they understood invisible labor better than anyone. But this morning kindness would not be the same as obedience. She reached for the memorandum, read the list of commands once more, then folded it with exquisite care and placed it beside the toast she had not touched. From the pocket of her morning gown she drew a small packet tied with dark green ribbon. The paper bore the discreet mark of Messrs. Vale and Hargreaves, solicitors of York. She had carried it for 3 days, close enough to feel its edges whenever she sat or breathed. Inside were letters, accounts, and a confirmation that the inheritance left by her mother's sister, Miss Elspeth Fairholt, had been settled for Rosamund's separate use. It was not vast compared with Caldermere wealth. Nothing was vast compared with a dukedom. But it was hers. Her name. Her right. Her roof, if she chose one. Augusta's voice faded down the corridor. Somewhere in the house a clock struck 9. Sebastian would be at the Western Farms for another hour, perhaps 2. He would return smelling of damp wool and horse leather, handsome in that careless way that had once made her heart lift before she learned not to expect his eyes to seek hers. He would ask whether there were letters. He would scan the memorandum his mother had left. He might notice the cold tea. He would not, she thought, notice the absence of hope unless she gave it shape. So she did. Rosamund slid the ring from her finger. For one brief second, the skin beneath it looked startlingly bare, pale where the band had covered it, marked by a faint indentation like a memory that had pressed too long. Her hand trembled once. She stilled it. Tears would have been easier. Tears would have allowed everyone to call her overwrought, delicate, in need of rest. She had no intention of making her grief convenient. She placed the ring on the plate. It struck porcelain with that small, terrible sound. Martin inhaled. Rosamund looked up, and the young footman went rigid. "My lady," he whispered, forgetting himself. In another house, on another morning, she might have corrected him gently. Today, she only said, "There is no need to be alarmed, Martin. I have not broken anything." His eyes dropped to the sapphire. "Should I fetch his grace?" No, the word was soft, but it did not bend. "His grace has already chosen where he wishes to be this morning." A blush climbed the footman's face, not from impropriety, but from the helpless shame of one decent person seeing too much. Rosamund took a sheet of Caldermere stationery from the small writing box near her elbow. For 8 years she had written invitations, condolences, replies, instructions to tradesmen, seasonal notes to tenants' wives, and careful lines to people who never suspected that each graceful phrase cost her something. This last note took less than a minute. "I return what was never truly given to me." She sanded the ink, folded the paper once, and placed it beneath the ring so that the sapphire held it down. Then she rose. The chair made no sound against the carpet. That pleased her. Leaving did not require noise. In the hall, her lady's maid, Beatrice, waited with Rosamund's dark travelling cloak and a face too pale for discretion. Beatrice had been with her since London and knew the difference between a whim and a decision. "The carriage is at the east door, Your Grace," she said, voice low. "And the trunk?" "Loaded." "Only the small one, as you ordered." Augusta would have noticed a large trunk. A small one suggested a morning call, perhaps a visit to a tenant, perhaps nothing that mattered. Rosamund accepted the cloak and fastened it herself. Her fingers felt strange without the weight of the ring. Lighter. Exposed. Human. As they crossed the corridor, she passed the great looking glass framed in carved oak. For years she had seen herself there as Caldermere wished to see her, slender, composed, pale in expensive silk, a duchess arranged to suit the house. This morning she saw a woman of 30 years with calm eyes, a mouth that had forgotten how to beg, and a packet from York solicitors tucked beneath her glove. At the turn of the staircase, Mrs. Vale appeared, keys at her waist, alarm flashing beneath training. "Your Grace, the Dowager Duchess expected you in the blue drawing-room after breakfast." Rosamund paused. The house seemed to pause with her. "Then her Grace will be disappointed." The housekeeper swallowed. "Shall I say when you will return?" For the first time that morning, Rosamund felt something close to sorrow. Not for the house. Not for Augusta. For the woman she had been, who would have answered carefully, softened the truth, made her own wound palatable. She looked toward the breakfast-room door. The ring was no longer on her hand. The silence was no longer inside her. "No," she said. You may say I have gone to attend to my own affairs. Outside, the air smelled of wet stone and early autumn fields. Caldermere Park spread around her in disciplined grandeur, lawns clipped smooth, gravel curved in elegant sweeps, the house rising behind her with all the confidence of blood and inheritance. It had been built to make people feel small. Rosamund had felt small in it for 8 years. Today, as the carriage door opened, she did not look back until she had placed one foot on the step. In an upper window, a curtain stirred. Augusta, perhaps. Or a servant. Or the house itself, startled that a portrait had stepped out of its frame. Beatrice climbed in after her. The door closed. The carriage began to move, first slowly over the gravel, then faster as the avenue of elms drew them toward the road. Rosamund sat upright with her gloved hands folded over the solicitor's packet. Her chest ached, but beneath the ache was a narrow, bright steadiness she had not felt in years. Behind her, in the breakfast room at Caldermere Park, a sapphire ring lay on a white plate beneath the eyes of dead duchesses. Ahead of her, beyond the grey Yorkshire morning, waited York, Messrs. Vale and Hargreaves, and the first deed that would bear her name alone. She did not know whether Sebastian would follow. For once, that was not the question that mattered. Sebastian Atherley returned to Caldermere Park with mud on his boots, a damp riding coat over one arm, and the faint irritation of a man who believed the morning had already spent too much of itself on trivial problems. The Western farms had not required his presence. He knew that before he reached them. A broken culvert, a quarrel between two tenants over drainage, a complaint about a gate left open in the lower pasture. All of it could have been handled by Mr. Bellamy, his steward. Yet Sebastian had gone because Land never looked at him with wounded patience. Land asked for decisions. Land yielded to order. Land did not sit opposite him at breakfast with quiet eyes and make him aware, in some deep, unwelcome place, that silence could be an accusation. He crossed the entrance hall at 10:30, handed his gloves to a footman, and noticed at once that the house was too still. Caldermere Park was never noisy, but it had a living rhythm. Servants moved, doors opened, coal scuttles sounded against hearths, distant bells rang from rooms occupied by people who expected to be obeyed. That morning, the silence had a held breath inside it. Sebastian paused beneath the carved staircase. Where is her grace? The footman's face altered before he could stop it. Fear. Not the fear of wrongdoing. The fear of news. I believe her grace has gone out, your grace. Gone out where? I am not certain, your grace. Sebastian looked at him for 1 second longer than mercy required. The young man lowered his eyes. Mrs. Vale may know. Send her to the breakfast room. The footman bowed and vanished. Sebastian did not hurry. He never hurried in his own house. But with each step toward the breakfast room, some instinct sharpened. The door stood open. Inside, his chair remained untouched. Rosamund's place had been cleared of everything except one white plate, one folded note, and the Caldermere sapphire ring. The sight stopped him at the threshold. Not startled him. Stopped him. There were men who would have seen the jewel first, because it was valuable. Sebastian saw the empty place where her hand should have been. He crossed the room slowly. The morning light had shifted, laying a pale strip across the table, and the sapphire caught it with a cold blue fire. He had seen that ring on Rosamund's finger for 8 years. At balls. At dinners. At church. Resting against a teacup. Folded over a prayer book. Curled discreetly in her lap when his mother corrected her choice of guests or her manner of receiving them. He could not recall the last time he had looked at the hand beneath it. The note was held in place by the ring. He lifted the jewel, and the paper breathed free. I return what was never truly given to me. 6 words, written in Rosamund's neat hand, with no blot, no tremor, no plea. Sebastian read them once. Then again. The quiet in the room changed shape. It no longer felt like absence. It felt like judgment. Mrs. Vale appeared at the door, keys at her waist, cap perfectly pinned, face less certain than her posture. Behind her, Martin the footman hovered and clearly wished himself dead or elsewhere. Sebastian did not look away from the note. When did her grace leave? A little after 9, your grace. In which carriage? The small travelling carriage. With luggage. One small trunk, Your Grace. Who attended her? Beatrice, Your Grace. Sebastian folded the note with excessive care. The paper seemed dangerous, as though rough handling might turn 6 words into something he could not bear to read. And why was I not informed? Mrs. Vale paled. Her Grace gave no instruction that you should be sent for. I did not ask what Her Grace instructed. I asked why I was not informed that the Duchess of Caldermere had left this house with luggage. Martin swallowed audibly. Mrs. Vale lowered her gaze. The Dowager Duchess was told. The answer entered him like cold water. Of course. His mother had been told. Caldermere had moved as it always moved, around Rosamund rather than toward her. Sebastian turned then, and the footman flinched though Sebastian had not raised his voice. Martin. Yes, Your Grace. You were present this morning. Yes, Your Grace. What did you see? The boy looked toward Mrs. Vale, then back at Sebastian. I saw Her Grace finish writing the note. She set the ring upon it. Was she distressed? The footman hesitated. No, Your Grace. That answer wounded more deeply than tears would have done. No. She was very calm, Your Grace. Sebastian heard the indictment beneath the words. A woman in hysterics might return. A woman who left calmly had already suffered the storm elsewhere. Did she say anything? Martin's ears reddened. Only that she had not broken anything. Sebastian closed his hand around the ring. The setting pressed into his palm. Leave us. Mrs. Vale dipped a curtsy, but Sebastian stopped her with one look. Not you. The housekeeper remained. Martin escaped. When the door closed, Sebastian placed the ring and note on the table before him. How many letters addressed to Her Grace have passed through my mother's secretary before reaching her? Mrs. Vale's breath caught. It was the smallest sound, and it told him more than any confession. Your Grace, the Dowager Duchess has always overseen much of the household correspondence. That was not my question. I cannot say precisely. Then say imprecisely. Mrs. Vale gripped the ring of keys at her waist. Some invitations. A few family letters. Matters the Dowager Duchess believed would trouble Her Grace unnecessarily. Trouble her. His voice was quiet. Was my wife a child in this house? Mrs. Vale looked stricken. No, Your Grace. Was she ill? No, Your Grace. Was she unfit to read her own letters? No, Your Grace. The answers fell like stones. Sebastian looked down at the note again. In 8 years, Rosamund had never accused him. She had never demanded scenes, never embarrassed him before guests, never raised her voice where servants might hear. He had mistaken restraint for contentment because restraint made life easier for everyone who benefited from it. A movement sounded behind him. Augusta Atherley entered as if summoned by the scent of disorder. She wore black silk, pearls, and an expression of grave inconvenience. Sebastian, there is no need to alarm the household. Rosamund is overwrought. A little time away may cure her of this unfortunate impulse. He turned. Where is she? I presume with some Fairholt connection. She has always been susceptible to that side of the family. Where is she? Augusta's mouth tightened. Don't take that tone with me. It's unbecoming. Unbecoming? He repeated the word with such stillness that Mrs. Vale lowered her head. My wife has left this house, and her letters have been managed like contraband. I am asking where she has gone. She'll return when she remembers what she owes your name. What she owes my name. Sebastian looked at the sapphire ring. And what did my name owe her? For the first time, his mother did not answer at once. That brief silence told him she had expected anger. She had not expected the question to turn. You are tired, Augusta said at last. You have had a wet ride and a troublesome morning. Do not make a public humiliation of a private marital sulk. Do not call it that again. The words landed flat and final. Augusta's eye sharpened. You cannot allow a duchess to parade disobedience. If you go after her, society will say she has trained you to heal. Society may say what it likes after it learns I am not interested in its opinion of my wife. Your wife has placed a ducal jewel on a breakfast plate like a housemaid returning borrowed ribbons. My wife placed a ducal jewel where I would finally be forced to look at it. Augusta drew herself up. I have protected this house for longer than she has belonged to it. That is precisely what concerns me. Colour rose high in his mother's cheeks. Mrs. Vale stared at the carpet. Sebastian moved to the bell pull and rang once. The sound seemed to pass through every corridor. When the butler appeared, Sebastian said, "Send for Mr. Bellamy at once. Then dispatch a rider to Mr. Harcourt in York. I want our solicitor here before dusk if the roads allow it. If not, I want a written reply by mounted messenger." Augusta stepped forward. "For heaven's sake, Sebastian, don't drag solicitors into a matter of female sensibility. The matter became one for solicitors when my wife's correspondence was interfered with and no one thought to inform me she had consulted legal men of her own." Augusta went very still. There it was. The first true crack in her composure. Sebastian saw it and felt the ground of the morning tilt. "What do you know?" he asked. "Nothing of importance." "Then you will have no difficulty remaining silent while I find out." The butler returned sooner than expected, breath slightly uneven from haste. "Your Grace, a messenger has just arrived from York. He says it concerns her Grace." Sebastian crossed the room in 3 strides. The envelope bore the mark of Messrs. Vale and Hargreaves. He broke it open. The letter was brief, polite, and devastating in its simplicity. Lady Rosamund Atherley, Duchess of Caldermere, had arrived safely in York. She was expected that afternoon to complete negotiations regarding the purchase of Briarwick Hall, the estate adjoining Caldermere Park along the eastern boundary. Sebastian read the words once. His mother whispered, "Impossible." He looked toward the windows, beyond which the grey Yorkshire morning stretched over land he had believed entirely familiar. The ring lay behind him on the table, no longer a symbol of possession, but a question he had failed to answer for 8 years. Briarwick Hall. Beside him. Not beneath him. Not within his command. Beside him. For the first time since he had entered the room, Sebastian closed his fingers around Rosamund's note not as a duke handling an inconvenience, but as a husband finally understanding that the empty chair had not been a warning. It had been the consequence. By the time Rosamund reached York, the morning had hardened into a pale, windless afternoon, and the wheels of the small travelling carriage had collected enough mud from the northern road to make Beatrice wince each time they passed a shop window. York was not London, with its polished cruelty and drawing-rooms scented by judgment. It was older, greyer, built of stone that seemed to remember every bargain ever made beneath its roofs. Rosamund watched the city pass through the carriage glass with her gloved hands folded over the packet from Messrs. Vale and Hargreaves. Her bare ring finger rested against the ribbon. The absence of the sapphire felt strange, like stepping into daylight after years behind heavy curtains. She had expected panic by now. She had expected shame, or at least the instinct to turn back before Caldermere's shadow stretched too far behind her. Instead, she felt each mile between herself and the breakfast room settle into her bones as proof. She had not fled without thought. She had not acted in temper. Every paper in the packet had been copied twice. Every account had been reviewed. Every question she had been afraid to ask aloud in her husband's house had been asked in writing, carefully, privately, and under the name that had belonged to her before she became a duchess. Lady Rosamund Fairholt. The second daughter of the late Earl of Fairholt. A woman, her Aunt Elspeth had once told her, might be swallowed by a great house if she forgot she had been born with a name of her own. At the door of the solicitor's office, Beatrice touched her sleeve. "Your Grace, are you certain you wish me to wait below?" "Quite certain." Rosamund looked up at the brass plate beside the entrance. Messrs. Vale and Hargreaves, solicitors. The letters were small, respectable, and unromantic. They seemed more merciful than all the chandeliers in Mayfair. "This is not a scene for fear, Beatrice. It is a scene for ink." Beatrice gave a quick, nervous smile. "Then I hope the ink behaves better than people do." Ink usually does, when properly witnessed. Rosamund climbed the narrow stairs alone. The clerk who admitted her into the front office tried very hard not to stare at the Duchess of Caldermere arriving without the Duke, without her ring, and without any male relative to answer for her intentions. That small struggle showed in the way he dropped one ledger, caught another, and bowed so low his forehead nearly met the desk. "Mr. Hargreaves is expecting you, Your Grace." Mr. Hargreaves rose when she entered the inner room, a thin gentleman with careful spectacles and the expression of a man who trusted documents more than declarations. Across from him sat Mr. Pritchard, the land agent representing the elderly owner of Briarwick Hall. Pritchard was broad, glossy, and too smooth about the mouth. He had the air of someone who had already decided Rosamund's courage was an inconvenience that could be priced away. On the table lay the deed draft, a set of maps, and a smaller folded paper bearing an old red seal. Rosamund noticed that last one at once. It had the faded impression of the Caldermere crest. Mr. Hargreaves bowed. "Your Grace, we are prepared to proceed." Mr. Pritchard cleared his throat. "With respect, there remained certain questions." Rosamund removed her glove slowly. "Questions are welcome, Mr. Pritchard. Delays are not." His smile did not change. "Naturally. Yet given your position as a married lady, and given the proximity of Briarwick Hall to His Grace's principal seat, one must consider whether His Grace has been fully consulted." The room went quiet in that particular way rooms went quiet when everyone inside understood that a woman had been insulted politely. Rosamund placed her packet on the table. "His Grace has not been consulted because the funds are not His Grace's. Even so, the public impression might be unfortunate. The public impression is not a term in the purchase agreement." Mr. Hargreaves almost looked pleased. Pritchard tapped the deed with one thick finger. "No, but prudence is. Briarwick Hall shares an eastern boundary with Caldermere Park. It would be regrettable if an impulsive domestic misunderstanding were to create difficulty between two estates." Rosamund looked at him fully then. She had sat through enough dinners beside men who believed a calm voice could disguise contempt. Pritchard did not frighten her. He only reminded her of every closed door that had been called kindness. "Mr. Pritchard, my domestic life is not under your management. My aunt's settlement is held for my separate use. Mr. Hargreaves has confirmed the point. The seller accepted my offer in writing. The deposit has been placed. Unless you are prepared to state that the owner of Briarwick Hall has withdrawn from the agreement, we shall continue." A faint color rose under the agent's skin. "The owner is elderly. She may be persuaded that another buyer would be simpler." "Another buyer," Rosamund said. "How delicately put." Mr. Hargreaves adjusted his spectacles. "Mr. Pritchard, has another offer been made?" Pritchard hesitated a fraction too long. The hesitation was small, but Rosamund had lived 8 years among people who weaponized fractions. "There has been interest." "From whom?" Rosamund asked. "I am not at liberty to say." "Then you are at liberty to proceed with the offer already accepted." Pritchard's jaw set. "Your Grace, you must understand that certain parties may consider this purchase provocative. Then certain parties have mistaken my right to a roof for an invitation to debate." The door opened before Pritchard could reply. The clerk appeared, flustered to the roots of his hair. "Forgive me, sir. His Grace the Duke of Caldermere has arrived." Rosamund's fingers tightened once on the edge of the chair. Only once. Then she released it. Mr. Hargreaves looked from her to the door. "Shall I have him wait?" There it was, the old habit of rooms bending toward Sebastian before he even entered. Rosamund felt it like a draught against a candle. She had not come 5 miles beyond fear, 30 miles by road, and 8 years through silence only to have her name swallowed at the threshold. "No," she said. "Let His Grace enter. But do not remove my papers from the center of the table." Sebastian came in without hat or riding gloves, his dark coat marked by travel, his face controlled and pale beneath that control. He looked first at Rosamund. Not at the deed. Not at Pritchard. Not at the maps. Her hand lay bare on the table beside Aunt Elspeth's packet, and she saw the moment he noticed. It passed through his eyes like pain quickly shuttered. "Your Grace," she said. It was not cold. It was formal, which was worse. He bowed. "Your Grace." Pritchard nearly sagged with relief. "Your Grace, I am grateful you have come. There are delicate matters regarding Briarwick Hall, and naturally your approval will simplify the transaction." Sebastian turned to him. "My approval is not required for Her Grace to purchase property with funds settled for her separate use." Pritchard blinked. Rosamund did not. She did not look away from Sebastian, because the words had struck somewhere she had not guarded well enough. He had not said "my wife." He had not said "the Duchess under my protection." He had said "Her Grace," and then he had stood aside from what was hers. "Of course," Pritchard said, recovering badly. "I only meant that, given the connection between the estates, it might be wise if the deed were reviewed under Caldermere authority." "It is being reviewed under legal authority." Sebastian's voice remained even. "That will be sufficient. But the boundary agreement is complicated." "Then explain it to Her Grace." Pritchard looked as though he had been asked to bow to a closed door. "To Her Grace. She is the purchaser." Sebastian moved to the side of the room rather than the head of the table. It was a small action. It altered everything. Rosamund felt Mr. Hargreaves glance at her, waiting. She picked up the pen. The weight of it surprised her. It was only wood and nib, but it seemed heavier than the sapphire ring had ever been. "Before I sign," she said, "I wish to see the sealed boundary paper." Mr. Hargreaves unfolded it and placed it before her. The script was old but legible, the ink browned with age. The eastern wall between Caldermere Park and Briarwick Hall had once included a tenant path, a shared well, and an agreement that neither estate might obstruct access without cause. Rosamund read the names. Fairholt. Atherley. Her breath slowed. Aunt Elspeth had known. Augusta had known too. That was why Briarwick mattered. Not because it was grand. Because it touched Caldermere at a place where truth had been walled over. Pritchard reached for the paper. Merely an antiquated formality. Rosamund covered the edge with her hand. "No. It is part of what I am buying." Sebastian's gaze lowered to her hand, still bare, still steady. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. "Then it should remain with the deed." Pritchard's last resistance collapsed under the simple fact of a duke refusing to rescue him from a woman's competence. Mr. Hargreaves turned the pages. Rosamund signed each place indicated. Lady Rosamund Atherley. Duchess of Caldermere. Born Fairholt. At the final signature, her hand trembled. Sebastian saw it. He took one step as if instinct had moved him before permission. Then he stopped. He did not touch her. He did not offer to steady the pen. The restraint did what his touch might not have done. It allowed her to finish. Mr. Hargreaves sanded the ink and bowed. "Briarwick Hall is yours, Your Grace, subject to final registration and delivery of the remaining documents." The words entered the room without music, but Rosamund heard them as if a door had opened in a house long locked. "Yours." Not Caldermere's. Not Augusta's. Not Sebastian's by courtesy or command. "Yours." She rose, and every man rose with her. Pritchard bowed with poor grace. Sebastian stood near the window, his face unreadable except for the place around his mouth, which had lost its old certainty. Rosamund gathered her gloves and the copied papers. "I thank you, Mr. Hargreaves. Please send all future correspondence directly to Briarwick Hall." Sebastian looked at her then, sharply, as though the address had made the truth physical. Outside the window, York's bells began to mark the hour. Rosamund turned toward him. For a moment, neither spoke. 8 years of breakfast tables, unanswered letters, and perfect public composure stood between them. At last he said, "Rosamund, I didn't know." She wanted to believe the pain in his voice. That was the dangerous part. She looked at him with all the calm she had carried from Caldermere to this room. "No, Your Grace. You did not." The title landed softly, but he flinched as if it had found bone. She drew on her gloves. "We shall be neighbors now. Nothing more." Then she walked past him toward the door, leaving Sebastian Atherley beside the table where, for the first time in their marriage, her name had been written where his could not replace it. Briarwick Hall received Rosamund with a door that stuck, a bell pull that came loose in Beatrice's hand, and a hall clock that had stopped at 20 minutes past 2, as though the house itself had tired of waiting for better company. It was not grand in the Caldermere manner. It did not rise from the land like a command. Its stone front was weathered, its ivy had overreached the upper windows, and one corner of the roof showed a dark line where rain had found its way in. Yet when Rosamund stepped across the threshold, she felt no invisible hand pressing her shoulders down. No portrait of an Atherley bride watched her to measure whether she had stood correctly. No dowager's voice floated from a drawing room to tell her which chair suited her station. The air smelled of cold hearths, beeswax, and old paper. It smelled neglected, not hostile. That distinction mattered. "The kitchen roof leaks during a hard rain," said Mr. Alden, the Briarwick steward, a narrow man in his late 50s with silver hair and boots carefully polished beyond the state of his coat. He had been waiting with a ring of keys and the wary politeness of someone unsure whether a duchess intended to be ornamental or useful. "The west servants' staircase wants repair. The laundry pump is poor. 2 chimneys smoke. The east pasture fence will not survive winter without new posts." "Good," Rosamund said. Mr. Alden blinked. Beatrice, behind her, nearly smiled. Rosamund untied her bonnet and handed it to her maid. "I would rather hear what the house needs than what people think I wish to hear. Begin with the kitchen roof." "Your Grace." "Hungry servants make poor workers. Wet servants become ill. A wet kitchen is therefore not a domestic inconvenience. It is bad management." Mr. Alden stared at her for one startled second, then bowed with a respect that had not been there when she entered. "Yes, Your Grace." The tour began in the rear of the house, not the drawing room. That, too, pleased her. She saw the kitchen where 2 maids dropped curtsies so quickly one nearly struck her elbow on the table. She saw the cracked flagstone near the scullery door, the pantry shelves, the draught beneath the servants' hall window, and the narrow room that had been given to 3 maids when 2 would have been crowded enough. She asked names. She remembered them. When an elderly cook named Mrs. Pike apologized for the poor fire, Rosamund said, "The fire has done its best with damp coal. We shall not blame it for bad storage." Mrs. Pike looked down at once, but not before Rosamund saw her mouth tremble toward a smile. By late afternoon, the house had begun to stir around her in small, uncertain ways. A boy ran for fresh coal. A maid opened the shutters in the morning room. Beatrice supervised the unpacking of one trunk as though it contained an army. Rosamund stood in the center of the entrance hall with Mr. Alden's repair list in her hand and felt, for the first time in years, tired from decisions she had actually made. "There is also the matter of the tenant path," Mr. Alden said. His voice had changed. He was still careful, but caution no longer ruled every syllable. "The path by the eastern boundary?" Rosamund asked. "Yes, Your Grace. It once crossed a strip of Caldermere land near the old wall and saved nearly a mile for those coming from the lower cottages to the well and the north road. It has been closed these 3 years." "Closed by whom?" Mr. Alden looked toward the window, where Caldermere Park lay beyond fields and stone. "By instruction sent through Caldermere's estate office. There was said to be concern over trespass." Rosamund folded the repair list. "Were the tenants trespassing?" "No, Your Grace. Not as I understood the old agreement." "Then we shall understand it properly." She followed him outside as the light began to thin over Yorkshire's rolling ground. Briarwick's garden had once been formal, but lavender had escaped its beds and grass pushed between the stones. Beyond it, the land sloped toward the eastern boundary, where an old wall ran across the fields in uneven grey. On the far side stood Caldermere Park, smooth, wealthy, and disciplined. Its distant windows flashed in the weak sun. Rosamund had lived behind those windows that morning. Now she stood outside them. The difference was large enough to make her breathe carefully. Mr. Alden stopped beside a rusted gate set into the wall. A chain looped through it, newer than the iron, with a Caldermere lock. "This was the way through?" she asked. "Yes, Your Grace. The lower cottages lie just beyond that rise. Without the path, Mrs. Dawlish and the older tenants must go around by the road." "How far?" "Near a mile, Your Grace. More in mud." Rosamund touched the cold chain. It was not dramatic. It was not a locked tower or a shouted insult. It was merely a chain placed where tired people needed to pass. That was how power often behaved when no one questioned it. Small, practical, and cruel enough to call itself order. "Find me every record concerning this gate," she said. The purchase deed mentioned a boundary paper. "I want the original if it is in this house. There may be old estate maps in the steward's cabinet. Then we shall open it tonight." A sound carried across the wall. Hooves, slowing on the Caldermere side. Mr. Alden stiffened before Rosamund turned. Sebastian sat on a dark horse beyond the locked gate, hat in hand, his coat dark against the fading fields. He had stopped several yards back, as though distance were the last courtesy left to him. For a moment, no one spoke. The wall was no higher than her shoulder, but it might have been built from all 8 years of their marriage. "Your Grace," Sebastian said. Not Rosamund. Not my dear. Not any word that presumed a right he had lost. Rosamund inclined her head. "Your Grace." Mr. Alden bowed low enough to acknowledge the rank on the other side of the wall. Sebastian looked at the chain, then at the steward, then back to Rosamund. His face tightened. "I did not know this gate had been locked." "That seems to have become a frequent condition of your household," she said. The words were not loud, but Mr. Alden looked down at once. Sebastian accepted them without defense. "That was new." "It will be opened." Rosamund's hand remained on the chain. "By whose command?" "Mine." "Because I discovered it." He paused. A year ago, perhaps even a month ago, he would have answered with authority and thought that sufficient. This time he looked at the gate as if seeing more than iron. "Because it should not have been closed without cause." "That is a better answer." His gaze moved to her face. The restraint in it was almost painful. "May I send Bellamy with the key in the morning?" "You may send him to Mr. Alden. The path belongs to the agreement, not to my gratitude." A faint breath left him. It might have been sorrow. It might have been respect. "Understood." The horse shifted, impatient with human difficulty. Sebastian steadied it with one hand, but his eyes did not leave Rosamund. She was aware of the mud on her hem, the wind loosening a strand of hair near her temple, the absence of the ring, and the absurd fact that he had never looked at her so closely in a ballroom. He had needed a wall between them to learn how to see across one. "Did you arrive safely?" he asked. It was a small question. Too late, perhaps. Yet not nothing. "I did." "Is the house sound?" No, for the first time that day, his mouth moved almost toward a smile, though it did not reach him. "You sound relieved." A house that admits its damage may be repaired. Silence followed. It held more than politeness. Sebastian lowered his gaze first. "I will not trespass on your afternoon." "No," she said. "You will not." He bowed from the saddle, a formal gesture made strange by the rough field and the locked gate between them. Then he turned his horse back toward Caldermere Park. Rosamund watched him go only until the first rise took him from view. Then she faced Briarwick again. "Mr. Alden cleared his throat. "Shall I have the steward's cabinet brought open, Your Grace?" "Yes." The answer came at once. By candlelight an hour later, in a small estate room that smelled of dust and sealing wax, Mr. Alden forced open the warped cabinet. Ledgers emerged first, then rent rolls, then a flat leather case tied with brittle cord. Rosamund untied it herself. Inside lay an old map, browned at the folds, its ink faded but clear enough. The eastern boundary was marked in red. The tenant path was drawn plainly across the wall. At the bottom, beside the Fairholt signature, was the crest of Caldermere, pressed into wax like a secret someone had believed buried by time. Rosamund set one hand lightly on the map. Beyond the window, across the dark fields, Caldermere Park had begun to glow with lamplight. Once, that glow had meant home. Now it looked like a question waiting to be answered. The map did not belong to the dust. Rosamund knew it the moment Mr. Alden lifted the candle closer and the faded lines sharpened under the wavering light, showing not merely fields and walls, but intentions older than her marriage. Briarwick Hall had not always been a small, neglected neighbour pressed against Caldermere Park like a poor relation at a grand table. Its eastern meadows, its shared well, its tenant path, and the orchard beyond the old wall had once belonged to the Fairholt maternal line, held through the women of the family before debts, marriages, and polite arrangements had thinned the truth into rumour. At the lower corner of the map lay 2 seals, one Fairholt, one Atherley, pressed so close together that the wax had almost touched. Rosamund bent over them while the candle threw her shadow across the paper. "This was not an accident," she said. Mr. Alden stood on the other side of the estate-room table, his hands folded with the discipline of a man who had spent years knowing more than he was allowed to say. "No, Your Grace." Beatrice, who had been stacking old ledgers by date, looked up. "Then why was it hidden?" Rosamund did not answer at once. She traced the inked path from the lower cottages through the gate Sebastian had promised to open. So small a line. So much effort to erase it. "Because whoever controls Briarwick controls more than a house," she said. "They control access, memory, and perhaps an old obligation Caldermere would rather forget." Mr. Alden opened another drawer in the warped cabinet and found a packet wrapped in linen. The string broke when he touched it. Inside lay rent rolls, 2 brittle receipts, and a letter in a hand Rosamund recognized so suddenly that her throat tightened. Aunt Elspeth Fairholt had written with a slight rightward slant, as if every word were walking forward before the world could stop it. Rosamund unfolded the page. "My dear Rose, if this reaches you only after I am gone, forgive an old woman for trusting paper more than people. Briarwick is smaller than Caldermere, but it was never meant to kneel to it. Nor were you. The Atherleys will call this boundary a trifling matter. It is not. A woman may lose herself by inches before anyone calls it theft. Remember this, child, the ring was never meant to be a leash." Rosamund's breath left her in silence. The room seemed to draw back from that final sentence. Beatrice pressed one hand to her mouth. Mr. Alden lowered his eyes, not because he understood all of it, but because he understood enough. Rosamund read the words again. The ring was never meant to be a leash. Her aunt had never seen the sapphire on Rosamund's hand. She had died before the wedding, before Caldermere Park, before the breakfast table. Yet somehow she had known what great houses could do to women who entered them with hope. "Your Grace," Mr. Alden said gently, "there are other papers. An agent's name appears more than once. Mr. Silas Brinley. He handled certain discussions between Caldermere and the former Briarwick owners." Rosamund looked up. "On whose instruction?" "The papers do not say directly." "Then indirectly will have to do." Before he could answer, footsteps sounded in the passage. A maid appeared, breathless from haste, with a silver tray held in both hands as if the card upon it had weight. "Your Grace, His Grace the Duke of Caldermere has called." Beatrice looked sharply toward Rosamund. Mr. Alden went still. Rosamund folded Aunt Elspeth's letter and placed it beside the map. For a moment she saw Sebastian beyond the boundary wall, hat in hand, stopping himself from stepping too close. She did not want him in this room. She did not want him near her aunt's words. Yet if he had brought answers, she could not afford pride dressed as safety. "Show His Grace to the morning room," she said. "Not here." The morning room was the least repaired chamber in Briarwick that could still receive a duke. The wallpaper had faded to the colour of weak tea, and one pane of glass wore a crack like a fine white thread. Rosamund was already standing when Sebastian entered, carrying a packet tied in black ribbon. He took in the room with one swift glance, not with disdain, but with a kind of restrained pain, as if every cracked corner accused him personally. Then he bowed. "Your Grace. Your Grace." The formality passed between them like cold water. He held out the packet but did not move closer until she inclined her head. "These were found in the Caldermere secretary room. Some were addressed to you. Some concerned Briarwick. They should have reached you." Rosamund accepted the packet. His fingers did not touch hers. She noticed. She wished she had not. "Found by whom?" "By me, after I ordered the drawers opened." "And your mother permitted that?" "My mother was not asked." There was a quiet force in the answer, but not the old arrogance. Something had shifted in him since the locked gate. Rosamund set the packet on the table. You have made an enemy at home. No, his jaw tightened. I have discovered one. She looked down before the words could move her too much. That is a dangerous distinction for a son. It is a necessary one for a husband. The room went still. A coal shifted in a small fire, and the sound seemed indecently loud. Rosamund opened the packet to avoid answering. Several letters bore her name, unbroken seals long since loosened by other hands. One was from a tenant's widow thanking her for coal she had never known was requested. One was from a London charity asking for her patronage and receiving, apparently, no reply. One was from Aunt Elspeth's old solicitor, dated 3 years earlier, mentioning Briarwick and urging private consultation. Rosamund's mouth went dry. 3 years. Not days. Not weeks. 3 years in which a door had been held shut while she sat at breakfast and believed no one had written. Did you know? She asked. Sebastian did not answer quickly enough to insult her with comfort. No, but you should have. His eyes met hers. Yes. There it was. No defense. No explanation about estate burdens, parliamentary committees, drainage disputes, or the endless machinery of rank. Only the word he owed her. Yes. It nearly undid her because it did not try to. She refolded the letter with careful hands. An apology is not a restoration. I know. Do you? I am beginning to. That honesty was almost more dangerous than pride. Rosamund turned toward the window, where Briarwick's untrimmed garden darkened under a low sky. Beginning is very late, Sebastian. His name slipped out before she could stop it. His face changed, not dramatically, but as a man changes when a locked room opens an inch. I know that too. A carriage sounded outside before either could say more. Wheels on gravel. A bright female voice in the hall followed almost at once, too assured to belong to anyone seeking permission. Beatrice appeared at the door, colour high with annoyance. Your Grace, Lady Millicent Vane has called. She says she was passing. Rosamund almost laughed. Nobody passed Briarwick Hall by accident. Sebastian's expression hardened. You need not receive her. No, Rosamund said, gathering the letters. But absence is so easily turned into confession. Lady Millicent entered wearing pale lavender, a shade chosen by women who wish to seem gentle while drawing blood. She was fair, beautifully dressed, and smiling with exactly the degree of pity that made politeness unbearable. Her gaze flicked from Rosamund to Sebastian, then to the imperfect room, then to Rosamund's bare hand. Dear Duchess, she said, advancing with both hands extended. I couldn't rest after hearing you were installed here quite alone. How brave of you. How very unusual. Rosamund did not take the offered hands. Lady Millicent. Briarwick Hall receives callers by card. Millicent's smile sharpened. Of course. I feared ceremony might feel burdensome in your present circumstances. My present circumstances include a house, a steward, and more work than ceremony. I am not burdened. Sebastian moved slightly, but Rosamund spoke before he could. Millicent glanced at him with soft reproach. Your Grace, everyone is concerned. Caldermere cannot be easy without its Duchess, though perhaps a calmer arrangement may be found. A great house does require a steady hostess. Rosamund heard the sentence beneath the sentence. A hostess. Not a wife. Not a woman. A function to be replaced. How fortunate, then, that Caldermere already has a duke capable of remembering where his own drawing rooms are, she said. Sebastian's mouth tightened as though he had nearly smiled and thought better of it. Millicent coloured, then recovered. I only meant that society can be unkind when a lady separates herself from her proper place. Rosamund stepped to the small table and placed Aunt Elspeth's letter atop the packet Sebastian had brought. A lady's proper place is not always where society finds it convenient to leave her. The words were quiet, but the room heard them. Even Millicent seemed to understand that she had encountered not a discarded duchess in need of rescue, but a woman standing inside a house that had begun to answer to her. How philosophical, Millicent said lightly. I shall hope to see you at the county assembly. It would reassure everyone. Then everyone may prepare to be reassured. The silence after that was brief and deadly. Millicent curtsied to Sebastian first, then to Rosamund, a mistake so small it was almost invisible. Almost. When she had gone, Sebastian looked toward the door. She will carry every word to my mother. Rosamund gathered the letters against her palm. No. She will carry the version that serves them both. Then let me stop it. Rosamund looked at him. Do not stop rumors for me by standing in front of me. If I ask for help, stand beside me. The lesson struck him. She saw it land. After a moment, he bowed his head. Then I will wait until you ask. When he left, the morning room felt colder and larger, but not empty. Rosamund returned to the estate room and laid Sebastian's packet beside the old map. Aunt Elspeth's warning, the delayed letters, the boundary path, Mr. Brinley's name, Millicent's sudden visit, and Augusta's silence had begun to form a pattern. Not proof yet. But a pattern was how truth first announced itself to anyone patient enough to look. By dusk, a formal invitation arrived from Caldermere Park, written in Augusta's flawless hand, requesting the Duchess's presence at the county assembly. Rosamund read it once, then placed it beside the map. The trap was elegant. That did not make it less a trap. It only meant Augusta expected her to admire the workmanship while walking into it. The invitation remained on Rosamund's writing table through the night, placed beside Aunt Elspeth's letter and the old boundary map, where candlelight made the Dowager Duchess's handwriting look almost elegant enough to forgive. Almost. By morning, Briarwick Hall had found a voice of its own. Hammers sounded from the kitchen passage. A maid laughed once, then remembered herself and fell quiet. In the yard, Mr. Alden argued with a carpenter about roof slates while Beatrice stood in Rosamund's bedchamber holding 3 gowns over one arm as if each of them might alter the future by shade alone. Rosamund stood at the window, watching mist lift from the fields between Briarwick and Caldermere. Somewhere beyond that pale distance, Sebastian's house was waking in perfect order. Her house was waking in repair. She preferred the latter. The blue silk is the finest, Beatrice said. The grey is the safest. The dark green is the one Her Grace the Dowager Duchess would least expect. Rosamund turned. Then we shall not choose for Augusta. No, Your Grace. Beatrice lowered the blue silk at once, though her eyes remained anxious. What shall we choose for? Rosamund looked at the open invitation. County Assembly at Harrogate Rooms. Attendance requested in honor of visiting families and local patrons. The words were harmless. The intention was not. Augusta would not summon her into public to welcome her. Lady Millicent would not have called at Briarwick by chance the day before. A rumour had been seeded, and the assembly would be the garden where it bloomed. We choose for steadiness, Rosamund said. Not mourning. Not defiance. Not apology. Beatrice held up the grey. It was pearl-coloured, modest, and beautifully cut, with no ornament except a narrow line of seed pearls at the sleeve. This, then? Yes. Rosamund touched the empty space at her left hand. And no jewels. Beatrice's gaze flicked to her bare finger. None at all. Pearls at the ears. Nothing on the hands. They will look. Let them. The answer sounded braver than she felt, but courage had never required comfort. It required only that one step be taken before fear finished speaking. After breakfast, which she ate in the small morning room because the dining room smelled too strongly of damp plaster, Mr. Alden brought the ledgers promised from the old cabinet. He laid them before her with the solemnity of a man placing evidence before a judge, though no court in England had ever frightened Rosamund as much as a room full of smiling ladies. I found this in the loose papers behind the rent roll, he said. It may be nothing. Nothing rarely hides behind ledgers, Rosamund replied. The paper was a receipt, folded twice and worn at the edges. It recorded a payment made for years earlier to Mr. Joseph Tukes, former steward of Briarwick Hall, for discretion and boundary advisement. The signature at the bottom belonged to Silas Brinley, the agent whose name had appeared in Aunt Elspeth's papers. The pair was not named in full, only marked as acting under instruction from A.A. Rosamund read it twice. A.A. Augusta Atherley. The initials were not proof enough to ruin a Dowager Duchess. They were enough to explain the pressure building around Briarwick. Where is Mr. Tukes now? She asked. Retired to his son's cottage near Ripon, Your Grace. He was not well liked, but he liked money well enough to remember who gave it to him. Send a discreet inquiry. Not a threat. Not a demand. Ask whether he recalls Mr. Brinley's instructions regarding the eastern boundary. Mr. Alden bowed. Yes, Your Grace. He hesitated. You still mean to attend tonight? Rosamund folded the receipt and placed it in a small leather case with a copy of the boundary map. If I do not, they will say I am ashamed. If I do, they will try to make me so. I prefer the battlefield I can see. Beatrice, standing near the door, made a small distressed sound. Forgive me, Your Grace, but must it be a battlefield? Rosamund looked at her and softened. For them, yes. For me, it must be a room. That afternoon, while the grey gown was pressed and the carriage lamps were checked, a note arrived from Caldermere Park. The seal was Sebastian's, not Augusta's. Rosamund recognized it before Beatrice spoke. She took it into the morning room and opened it alone. The words were brief. If you wish to attend the assembly, I will escort you. If you prefer not to be seen with me, I will ensure a proper carriage and footmen are available without Caldermere livery. If you prefer neither, send no reply, and I will understand. Rosamund sat with the note in her hand longer than she meant to. There was no command in it. No instruction. No statement of what society would expect. Only choices, set before her without pressure. It was a small thing. It was not small to her. She rang for Beatrice. Send my reply to His Grace. What shall it say? That I thank him, but I shall arrive in my own carriage. Beatrice waited. Is that all? Rosamund looked again at the note. Add that I do not require Caldermere livery, but I appreciate the offer of propriety. Beatrice's mouth lifted slightly. He will understand. If he does not, then the lesson continues. Yet when evening came and Rosamund descended the stairs in the pearl-grey gown, she found Caldermere's senior footman waiting at the east door, not in ducal livery, but in plain dark coat, carrying no crest, no visible claim. Beside him stood Mr. Alden, who looked as if he had inspected every hinge in the carriage personally. His Grace sent Thomas, Mr. Alden said. He said a duchess should not be left to hire poor protection merely to avoid being claimed. The words were Sebastian's. Rosamund knew it at once. She felt the old ache stir in a dangerous place, but she did not feed it. Very well, she said. Thomas may ride behind. The drive to Harrogate Rooms took less than 5 miles and more nerve than any road to York. Beatrice sat beside her, gloved hands clasped tightly. Outside, the lamps of other carriages moved along the lane like wandering sparks, all converging upon the assembly, all carrying eyes, tongues, and judgments polished for public use. Rosamund kept one hand over the leather case in her reticule. The receipt lay inside. So did a copy of the map. She did not intend to brandish either like a woman desperate to be believed. But she would not enter defenseless. Your Grace, Beatrice whispered as they neared the lights, may I say something bold? You often do, Beatrice. You only disguise it as concern. Then I won't disguise it. You look like yourself tonight. Rosamund turned from the window. Do I? Yes. Not like Caldermere dressed you. Not like the Dowager Duchess arranged you. Like yourself. That nearly undid her more than insult would have done. Rosamund reached across the carriage and briefly touched Beatrice's hand. Then we have chosen correctly. Harrogate Rooms rose ahead, bright with lamps and carriage wheels, its entrance crowded with cloaks, silk, black coats, and the low murmur of county importance. Rosamund saw Augusta's carriage near the front. She saw Millicent Vane stepping down in rose satin, her fair head inclined toward a group of ladies already listening too closely. She saw, farther back, Sebastian standing alone near the entrance pillars, his face turned toward the road. He did not move toward Rosamund's carriage when it stopped. He waited. That waiting, more than any gallantry, unsettled her. The footman opened the door. A gust of cool air entered, carrying music, perfume, damp wool, and the faint metallic scent of coming rain. Rosamund stepped down without help from anyone except the footman whose arm she had accepted by choice. Sebastian bowed from several feet away. She returned the bow. No more. No less. Every eye at the entrance noticed. Inside, the assembly room glittered with candlelight and judgment. The musicians were halfway through a country dance when Rosamund appeared at the doorway. One violin faltered. Then another. Conversations thinned, turned, and stopped. Lady Millicent's smile widened with pity rehearsed to perfection. Augusta did not smile at all. Rosamund stood at the threshold, barehanded, pearl grey, unaccompanied by her husband but not abandoned, and let the silence meet her without lowering her head. The music died on a single unfinished note. The silence in Harrogate rooms did not last long enough to be called rude, which made it more cruel. It gathered, brightened, and hid itself beneath silk, coughs, fans, and the hurried scratch of bows returning to strings. Rosamund knew that kind of silence. She had sat inside it at dinners where Augusta corrected her guest list with a smile. She had heard it in London when a lady asked whether Caldermere preferred town without his duchess, then pretended the question had been harmless. Tonight the silence had a different flavour. It was hungry. It wanted to see whether a wife who had left a ducal breakfast table could be made to lower her eyes before a room that had not earned the right to judge her. Rosamund stepped forward. The pearl grey gown moved softly around her ankles. Her bare hands remained visible at her sides, and she felt every glance drop to the finger where the Caldermere sapphire had once declared ownership more loudly than affection. Sebastian stood near the entrance pillars, still several yards away, his expression controlled. He did not rush to her. He did not claim her before the crowd. He waited, as promised, and that restraint steadied her more than his arm might have done. Lady Millicent Vane drifted toward her through the parting room, rosy and bright, a blade wrapped in lavender silk. "Dear Duchess," she said, just loudly enough for the nearest cluster to hear. "How brave you are to come among us. We were all so concerned that solitude at Briarwick might make society painful." "Society is rarely painful, Lady Millicent," Rosamund replied. "Only instructive." A few fans stilled. Millicent's smile did not falter, but her eyes sharpened. "Then you must be learning a great deal. More than I was taught at Caldermere." The words were quiet. They travelled anyway. Across the room Augusta stood near the matrons, black silk immaculate, pearls glowing at her throat, her face arranged in sorrow so perfect it might have been painted on a mourning card. Rosamund gave her the smallest curtsy required by courtesy, no more. Augusta returned it with the faint bend of a woman acknowledging a disturbance she intended to remove. The music began again. Couples moved, though less surely than before. Rosamund accepted no dance. She crossed to the refreshment table, took a glass of lemonade, and placed herself where everyone could see she was not hiding. That was the first battle. To stand still under 100 curious eyes and not apologize for occupying space. Mrs. Hartley, the rector's wife, approached with kindness, struggling against fear. "Your Grace, Briarwick Hall is said to be quite damp in the West Wing. I hope you are not uncomfortable." "The West Wing needs plaster, Mrs. Hartley, not pity." Mrs. Hartley blinked, then smiled despite herself. "Then I shall send you the name of a reliable mason. You will do me a kindness." It was a small exchange, but it loosened something in the air. Not all eyes were cruel. Not all silence belonged to Augusta. That, too, mattered. Then Lord Penrith, a baronet with more curiosity than discretion, murmured near enough to be heard, "Still, one wonders at a lady purchasing land so near her husband's seat. A gesture of sentiment, perhaps, or of revenge." The first cut had been placed. Rosamund turned before anyone could decide she had not heard. "Do you wonder, Sir Lionel, or have you been asked to wonder aloud?" His face reddened. A ripple passed through the room, not laughter exactly, but the sound of attention changing sides. Millicent arrived at his shoulder as though drawn by the scent of danger. "Now, Your Grace, no one accuses you of anything so vulgar as revenge." She paused delicately. "Though people do talk when a duchess abandons her household and purchases the estate touching its boundary. It has such a dramatic appearance. Truth often looks dramatic to those who prefer arrangements made in private." Millicent's lashes lowered. "What a curious remark." "Not at all. Briarwick was offered for sale. I purchased it lawfully. With what funds? The question struck the room cleanly. Even the musician seemed to soften. Rosamund felt the insult land, not because it surprised her, but because it was precisely where Augusta would aim. Money. Legitimacy. Shame. Make the woman explain herself. Make her right to act look suspicious. A gentleman behind Millicent produced a folded note with the theatrical reluctance of a man delighted to be necessary. Rosamund recognized him as Mr. Charles Vane, Millicent's younger brother, pale and eager beneath his fashionable collar. "Forgive me," he said. "I would rather not speak, but a note was passed to me this afternoon. It appears relevant." Millicent made a soft sound. "Charles, don't. It's too unkind." Rosamund looked at her. "Then by all means let him continue. Unkindness becomes more useful when it stops pretending to be reluctant." Charles unfolded the paper. "It says, in a lady's hand, that Briarwick Hall would make a fitting punishment for his Grace, because his Grace's own boundary could become her Grace's prison." The words dropped into the assembly room like ink into clear water. They spread at once. Punishment. Prison. His Grace. Her Grace. Rosamund heard a gasp near the windows. Augusta closed her eyes briefly, as if wounded by grief she had helped rehearse. Millicent whispered, "How dreadful! I can't believe anyone would write such a thing." Sebastian moved then. Only 2 steps, but the room felt them. He came to stand near Rosamund's left side, not before her. The distinction was small enough for society to miss and large enough for Rosamund to feel in her bones. "Who gave you that note?" he asked. Charles paled. "It was delivered anonymously, Your Grace." "Conveniently." Sebastian held out one gloved hand. Charles surrendered the paper. Sebastian did not read it aloud again. He looked first at the handwriting, and something in his face became very still. Rosamund saw it. So did Augusta. "This is not her Grace's hand," Sebastian said. Millicent gave a faint, saddened laugh. "Surely, Your Grace, handwriting may be disguised when feeling is strong. Feeling does not alter the formation of a capital B in the same manner as my household secretary forms it." That sentence changed the room. Not dramatically. Aristocratic rooms rarely exploded. They chilled. They narrowed. They began counting exits. Augusta's fan stopped moving. Rosamund felt the leather case in her reticule press against her palm. She could have let Sebastian continue. She could have allowed his rank to swallow the insult and turn the entire room toward him. That would have been easier. It would also have repeated the old pattern with prettier intentions. "May I see it?" she asked. Sebastian turned at once and gave the note to her without display. No hesitation. No correction. She read the line. The phrase was melodramatic enough to be believed by those who wanted women to be governed by spite. The handwriting slanted in a way that almost resembled hers, but the loops were too narrow, the pressure too heavy. At the bottom, where a forged hand had attempted her initial, the R curled wrong. Rosamund lifted her eyes to the waiting room. A poor imitation is still an imitation. Millicent's smile tightened. "You deny writing it." "I deny more than that." Rosamund folded the note once. "Precisely. I deny the usefulness of the question being asked. You are all meant to wonder whether I bought Briarwick out of anger, shame, or instability. That keeps you from asking the only question that matters." No one spoke. Even the dancers had stopped pretending to dance. Rosamund looked from Millicent to Charles, then to Augusta, whose sorrow had become stone. "Who benefits if I am thought unworthy of my own house?" The room held its breath. Mrs. Hartley stared at her with open admiration. Sir Lionel Penrith looked suddenly desperate to be near another conversation. Sebastian's gaze did not leave Rosamund's face, and for the first time in 8 years, she saw no impatience in it. Only recognition. Millicent recovered first because vanity often mistakes quickness for intelligence. "Surely you don't mean to suggest anyone here has plotted against you?" "I mean to suggest that my lawful purchase of Briarwick Hall troubled someone enough to require a forged note, a public audience, and your brother's unwilling performance." Charles flushed crimson. "I didn't know it was forged." "No," Rosamund said. "But you were pleased to discover it was useful." A low sound moved through the room. It was not applause. It was better. It was society rearranging its posture. Sebastian faced the assembly then, his voice carrying with ducal calm. "Let there be no uncertainty. Her Grace's purchase of Briarwick Hall is lawful, honourable, and not subject to this room's approval. Anyone who says otherwise will answer to me." Augusta took one step forward. "Sebastian, you cannot possibly mean to dignify this spectacle." He looked at his mother. "I mean to end one." Rosamund felt the victory only as a tremor, not yet joy. Too much remained hidden. The note had not appeared by accident. The hand resembled someone trained in Caldermere's correspondence. The attack had failed, but it had revealed the direction from which the next one would come. She turned toward the refreshment table, placed her untouched lemonade down, and slipped the forged note into her reticule beside the map and receipt. Sebastian saw the movement. His expression darkened with understanding. Across the room, Augusta's eyes followed the note like a woman watching a key vanish into the wrong hand. The music did not resume for several seconds. When it did, the first notes trembled. Rosamund stood beneath the chandeliers, bare-handed and unbowed, while the county learned that the abandoned Duchess had not come to be pitied. She had come to listen, and now she knew where the lie had begun. By noon the next day, the county had already decided that Rosamund's composure at Harrogate Rooms was more troubling than any public tears could have been. Tears would have allowed them to pat her shoulder, lower their voices, and declare that the poor Duchess had been overcome by nerves. Composure required explanation. Worse, it required respect. At Briarwick Hall, the morning brought 2 calling cards from ladies who had ignored her for years, 1 basket of pears from Mrs. Hartley, and 1 unsigned note warning that a woman who embarrassed a great house should not expect its protection. Rosamund read the warning once, then placed it beneath the forged note from the assembly. It did not frighten her. It clarified the weather. In the estate room, Mr. Alden spread the ledgers across the table while Beatrice sorted letters by date. The old map lay in the centre like a wound finally uncovered. "This receipt from Mr. Brinley is not the only one," Mr. Alden said. "There are 3 more. All disguised as boundary advisement. All paid during the same year Briarwick was nearly sold below value." Rosamund looked over the figures. "And all before Aunt Elspeth's solicitor wrote to me." "Yes, Your Grace." Beatrice lifted a smaller ledger with a cracked brown cover. "This one has Lady Millicent's family name in it." Rosamund stilled. "Vane." "Yes, Your Grace. I found it tucked behind the rent book." Mr. Alden crossed to see. "That is not a Briarwick ledger." His face changed. "It records private notes. Debts, introductions, promised patronage." Rosamund read the page slowly. Lord Vane, Millicent's father, owed sums that would have ruined a less decorative family. Beside one entry was a mark in Augusta's hand. Another mentioned Brinley. Another mentioned influence over a future purchase of Briarwick, should the Fairholt claim be weakened. A cold understanding moved through Rosamund. Millicent's pity had not been social cruelty alone. It had been investment. If Rosamund were made unstable, ungrateful, or unfit, then Augusta could influence the fate of Briarwick and reward the Vanes with safety. "They need me to look reckless," Rosamund said. "Not merely unhappy." Mr. Alden folded his hands. "Yes, Your Grace." A carriage sounded outside before he could continue. Beatrice crossed to the window. "Caldermere livery." Rosamund did not move. Her pulse did, but her body had learned better than to confess first. "His Grace?" "No. Mr. Harcourt, I think." "The Duke's solicitor." The name struck harder than Sebastian's might have done. A solicitor did not come to Briarwick without purpose. Mr. Harcourt was shown into the morning room 10 minutes later, grave, silver-haired, and deeply uncomfortable. He bowed over Rosamund's hand without touching it. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion." An intrusion is usually forgiven after its purpose becomes clear. He looked pained. "His Grace has requested that I discuss a temporary arrangement regarding Briarwick Hall." Rosamund sat very still. "What arrangement?" Mr. Harcourt removed a folded paper from his case. A protective trust. Limited in scope. Designed to shelter the estate from malicious challenge, public scandal, or predatory interference while matters are investigated. The room altered. Not visibly. Nothing fell. No one cried out. Yet Rosamund felt the old breakfast room walls rise around her, paper by paper, phrase by phrase. Protective. Shelter. Limited. All the words men used when they wished a cage to sound like a favor. Under whose influence would this trust operate, she asked. Mr. Harcourt hesitated. Caldermere influence, in practical terms. His Grace would never interfere with your comfort. Her comfort. Not her authority. Not her decision. Rosamund stood. Mr. Harcourt, did His Grace instruct you to ask whether I wished such protection? The solicitor looked down. That was answer enough. He believed speed was necessary. Men often do when they are moving toward a woman's property. Mr. Harcourt winced. Your Grace, I believe His Grace is motivated by concern. I do not doubt it. That is what makes this worse. She crossed to the table where the warning note, the forged note, the map, and Aunt Elspeth's letter waited in quiet judgment. Please tell the Duke of Caldermere that Briarwick Hall is not to be folded into any Caldermere arrangement. Not for shelter. Not for convenience. Not for love dressed in legal language. Your Grace, he fears further damage to your reputation. Then he should not become the evidence used against it. Mr. Harcourt bowed, chastened, and withdrew with the unsigned paper still in his case. Beatrice closed the door after him and turned with tears bright in her eyes, though she did not let them fall. He meant to help. Yes, Rosamund said. That is the tragedy of it. By late afternoon, Augusta had already heard. Rosamund knew because the second note arrived folded inside a calling card, delivered by a footman who would not meet her eyes. It was written in the Dowager Duchess's perfect hand. My dear Rosamund, even Sebastian sees the need for calmer judgment. Do not force society to conclude that you must be managed for your own good. Rosamund read the sentence twice. Managed. There it was, the word Augusta had been waiting to give the county. Not betrayed. Not wronged. Managed. A duchess who needed management could be pitied, dismissed, and finally removed from decisions made around her. Rosamund walked at once to the east door. Had the gates to Caldermere closed? Beatrice stared. All of them, Your Grace. Only those that admit Caldermere carriages to Briarwick. And if His Grace comes? Rosamund held Augusta's card in one hand and the unsigned warning in the other. Then he may send a note like any other neighbor. At Caldermere Park, the same afternoon, Sebastian stood in his study with his own copy of Mr. Harcourt's draft unopened on the desk. He had not meant to take Briarwick from her. He had meant to surround it with walls high enough to stop Augusta, Millicent, Brinley, and every whispering fool in Yorkshire. That was what he told himself when he sent for Harcourt. That was what he had believed until the solicitor returned with Rosamund's answer written not on paper but in the expression of a decent man who had been made to understand he had carried an insult. She refused, Harcourt said. Sebastian looked toward the window. Beyond the parkland, Briarwick lay behind its old wall, newly visible to him because he had been forbidden to enter it. What exactly did she say? Harcourt repeated her words, each one clean enough to cut. Not for shelter. Not for convenience. Not for love dressed in legal language. Sebastian closed his eyes. Only for a moment. When he opened them, his mother stood in the doorway. She had not knocked. You see? Augusta said softly. Even your attempt to save her becomes an offense. Rosamund is not thinking clearly. Sebastian turned. Do not use my mistake as your proof. It is not only your mistake. It is her pattern. She leaves her ring, buys a neighboring estate, challenges respectable people in public, and now refuses protection. Society will not call that independence for long. What will society call intercepted letters? Augusta's face hardened. A household necessity. What will it call forged notes? You have no proof. Not yet. She stepped closer, pearl still and bright at her throat. Do not let guilt make you foolish, Sebastian. She has learned that public dignity is useful. She will wield it until you have no authority left even in your own county. The old Sebastian would have heard the warning. He would have seen estate, name, rank, and order all threatened by one woman's defiance. The man standing before Augusta now saw instead Rosamund's bare hand resting beside a deed he had not been allowed to sign. He saw the gate chain. He saw the way she had steadied the pen because he had not touched her. He saw, most bitterly, that his fear for her had still imagined his control as the cure. A servant entered with a note on a tray. Sebastian broke the seal. Bellamy had returned from the eastern boundary. The gates from Caldermere into Briarwick were closed to Caldermere carriages by Her Grace's instruction. No insult. No explanation. Only a boundary. Augusta read his face and smiled faintly. There. She answers you as if you were a trespasser. Sebastian folded the note. Perhaps I behaved as one. His mother's smile died. He left her standing in the study and walked out into the fading light. At the far edge of the park, the old wall ran grey between the two houses. On the Briarwick side, lamps began to glow one by one. For 8 years Rosamund had lived under his roof, and he had mistaken proximity for marriage. Now she was only across a boundary, and the distance was finally honest. The next morning, Briarwick Hall woke under a hard, white sky and the kind of cold that made every hinge complain. Rosamund had slept little, not because fear kept her awake, but because anger had become practical by midnight and practical anger required lists. By 7, she had sent Mr. Alden to fetch the oldest rent books, instructed Beatrice to copy the dates from the forged note and the Brinley receipts, and ordered a small fire lit in the estate room though the chimney smoked whenever the wind turned. On the table lay the map, the payment slips, Aunt Elspeth's warning, and Augusta's poisonous calling card. They looked less like separate papers now and more like pieces of one broken plate. The lie is in the boundary, Rosamund said, standing over the map while Mr. Alden held a ruler along the faded red line. Someone needed the path closed, but why invent a dispute if they could simply request it? Because a request may be refused, Your Grace, Mr. Alden answered. A dispute creates confusion. Confusion favors the richer estate. Rosamund looked at him. You have considered this before. His face tightened. I served under Mr. Tukes for 2 years before he left. He was fond of saying that small houses survive by not noticing what great houses take. Beatrice, seated near the window, looked up from her copies. That sounds like a confession practice too often. It does, Rosamund said. Who else would remember the old gate? Mr. Alden hesitated. Mrs. Dawlish, perhaps. She has the lower cottage nearest the eastern path. Her husband was a tenant here before he died. She carried washing through that gate for nearly 30 years. Then we shall call on Mrs. Dawlish. Your Grace, the lower cottages are rough in this weather. So is truth when one has delayed it. Within the hour, Rosamund crossed the damp fields with Mr. Alden, Beatrice, and a footman walking several paces behind. The walk was less than a mile, yet it taught her more about Briarwick than any drawing-room could have done. The grass soaked the hem of her plain walking dress. The wind bit through her gloves. The cottages sat low near the lane, stone-built and tired, their small gardens turned to winter stubble. Mrs. Dawlish's door was painted blue once, though weather had thinned it to a bruised grey. She opened it herself, a thin woman with white hair tucked under a cap, sharp eyes, and hands made rough by work. At the sight of Rosamund, she curtsied so quickly the movement looked painful. Your Grace. Mrs. Dawlish, Rosamund said, I have come to ask a question, not to trouble you. Great folks' questions are trouble often enough. Mr. Alden made a faint sound of alarm, but Rosamund almost smiled. Then let us hope mine behaves better. The widow studied her, then stepped aside. The cottage was clean, spare, and cold at the edges despite the fire. Rosamund refused the only chair until Mrs. Dawlish took it first. That small insistence changed the woman's face. Not trust yet. Curiosity. You remember the eastern gate, Rosamund said. Mrs. Dawlish's hands tightened in her lap. Everyone remembers it. Why was it closed? We were told the Duchess of Caldermere objected to the lower tenants crossing so near the park. The room went silent. Beatrice looked stricken. Mr. Alden closed his eyes. Rosamund felt the words pass through her without finding a place to settle. "Which Duchess?" Your Grace." Mrs. Dawlish's chin lifted, as if she expected punishment for saying it. That was the message. Mr. Brinley came with Mr. Tukes. Said her Grace did not care to see cottagers along the wall. Said the path offended the order of Caldermere. Rosamund sat very still. For 3 years, women had walked the longer road in mud because someone had borrowed her title to make cruelty elegant. "I gave no such instruction," she said. "I never knew the gate had been closed." Mrs. Dawlish looked at her bare hand, then at her face. "I wondered. You sent coal that winter when my Tom died." Rosamund thought of the letter Sebastian had brought, the one thanking her for coal she had never known was requested because someone had kept it from her. "I did not know whether it reached you." "It reached us." "So did the message about the gate." "We could never make the two fit." A sound came from outside. "Hooves on the lane." Mr. Alden moved to the window. "His Grace." Rosamund's shoulders stiffened before she could stop them. "Did he follow us?" "No, Your Grace," Beatrice said softly, peering past the curtain. "He is alone, and he has stopped at the road." A knock sounded. Not commanding. Not duke to tenant. A single knock, then waiting. Mrs. Dawlish looked from Rosamund to the door. "Shall I refuse him?" The question was so unexpected that Rosamund turned to her fully. A tenant widow, poor and vulnerable, had just offered to close a door against a duke because Rosamund stood inside it. Something in her chest warmed and hurt at once. "No. Let him enter." Sebastian stepped into the cottage with his hat in his hand and mud on his boots, then stopped at the threshold as if aware that rank could crowd a poor room even in silence. His gaze moved to Rosamund first, asking what his mouth had not yet spoken. "Mrs. Dawlish," he said, bowing slightly. "I beg pardon for disturbing your house." The widow blinked, clearly unprepared for apology from such a height. "Your Grace." Rosamund waited. Sebastian looked at her. "Bellamy brought me word that Brinley's old assistant has left Yorkshire. Before he went, he admitted a message was sent under your name regarding the gate. I came to tell you before my mother heard he had spoken." "And what do you intend to do with that information?" she asked. His answer did not come quickly. That mattered. Once, speed would have hidden thought. "Nothing until I know what you wish done." "Mrs." Dawlish stared at him as if he had begun speaking French. Rosamund did not soften her face. She could not afford to reward one correct sentence as if it erased years. "Mrs. Dawlish has just told me the same. She may be asked to repeat it. That could place her cottage at risk if Augusta's agent still controls the lease." "Then he will not control it by nightfall," Sebastian said. Then he stopped himself. She saw the pause. She saw the correction form. He turned to Mrs. Dawlish. "If her Grace approves, I will instruct Mr. Bellamy that no tenant connected to this matter is to be disturbed, threatened, or removed. I will put it in writing." Rosamund looked at the widow. "Would that ease your mind?" Mrs. Dawlish's eyes had gone bright, though her voice remained stern. "Paper eases more than promises, Your Grace." "Then paper it shall be," Rosamund said. Sebastian bowed his head once. "I will send it within the hour." He did not look proud of himself. Good. Pride would have spoiled it. Mrs. Dawlish rose slowly and went to a small drawer near the hearth. From beneath folded linen she drew a narrow paper, browned at the edge. "Mr. Tukes left this when he drank too much one evening and feared someone would say he invented the whole thing. I kept it because poor people keep what rich people forget they have dropped." She handed it to Rosamund. It was a copied instruction, not signed in full, but marked by Brinley and witnessed with initials that matched the old receipt. "Close the eastern path. Attribute the preference to her Grace if challenged. Avoid written reference to the Dowager Duchess." For a moment no one moved. Even the fire seemed to quiet. Rosamund felt Sebastian read the words beside her. His face became colorless. Not with anger alone. With shame. "They used my name," she said. And I let the house become a place where that was possible, he answered. The words were low, not meant for Mrs. Dawlish, though she heard them. Rosamund folded the paper with careful hands. This gives us the chain. The false message, the payment, the closed gate, and the forged note. There will be more, Sebastian said. My mother does not build with one stone. Then we shall remove them one at a time. He looked at her when she said we. She had not meant to offer it. Perhaps she had. Outside, a rider approached from the direction of Caldermere, carrying a sealed envelope. Sebastian stepped out to receive it and returned with the kind of stillness that never meant peace. From my mother, he said. The envelope was addressed to Rosamund. She broke the seal. The message was brief enough to be cruel. Attend dinner at Caldermere tomorrow evening and withdraw your insinuations regarding Briarwick, or the county shall hear exactly how far a duchess may fall when she forgets obedience. Rosamund handed it to Sebastian. He read it once, and something dangerous moved behind his eyes. This time, he did not speak before her. He waited. Rosamund looked at Mrs. Dawlish, at the paper in her hand, at the mud on Sebastian's boots, and then toward the old boundary wall beyond the cottage window. Then tomorrow, she said, the county may begin learning the difference between obedience and truth. Caldermere Park had never looked less like home to Rosamund than it did on the evening she returned to dine beneath its roof. The house rose from the darkening parkland in tiers of lit windows, every pane polished, every lamp obedient, every servant placed where a great family expected silence to have a posture. The gravel drive curved in a smooth sweep toward the entrance, and for a moment, as Briarwick's carriage slowed, her body remembered 8 years of arrivals in which she had stepped down already arranged for other people's comfort. Tonight the memory met resistance. She sat upright in the pearl-grey gown she had chosen again, not because she lacked richer silk, but because this colour did not apologize. In her reticule lay copies of the boundary paper, the Brinley receipt, Mrs. Dawlish's written statement, and the forged note from Harrogate Rooms. Beatrice sat beside her, pale but composed. Your Grace, she whispered, you need not stay if they turn cruel. Rosamund looked toward the front steps, where 2 footmen waited beneath the portico. Cruelty grows bolder when it believes departure is the only answer. The carriage stopped. Before the footman could lower the step, Sebastian appeared from the shadow of the doorway, dressed in black evening clothes, his face severe in the lamplight. He did not offer his hand at once. He stood beside the carriage door and waited until she looked at him. May I stand beside you tonight? He asked. The question was quiet enough that only she and Beatrice heard it, yet it seemed to alter the air more than any public declaration could have done. Rosamund remembered the protective trust. She remembered the gate closed against Caldermere carriages. She remembered him in Mrs. Dawlish's cottage, stopping himself before command became habit. Beside me, she said. Not before me. Something crossed his face, pain and relief so closely joined that she could not separate them. Beside you, he answered. Then, and only then, he offered his hand. She accepted it for the step down. She released it at once. He allowed the release without tightening his fingers. That, too, was a kind of apology. Inside, the hall smelled of beeswax, hothouse flowers, and expensive restraint. The portrait stared down from the walls, unchanged and unimpressed. Servants bowed. None looked directly at her bare hand, which meant all of them had noticed. Augusta waited at the entrance to the drawing-room in black silk and diamonds, the Dowager Duchess arranged like a monument to injured dignity. Lady Millicent Vane stood near her in pale rose, delicate and watchful. Several county neighbours had already arrived, among them Sir Lionel Penrith, Mrs. Hartley, and 2 ladies who had pretended not to see Rosamund at the assembly until it became fashionable to wonder what she would do next. Rosamund, Augusta said, as though speaking to a difficult child before witnesses. I am pleased you found the courage to come. Rosamund removed her glove slowly. Courage was not the difficulty, Your Grace. Millicent's fan opened with a whisper. How fortunate. We were afraid Briarwick had made you distrustful of old friends. Briarwick has made me attentive to old arrangements. Sebastian moved no closer, but his presence settled at her left side like a line drawn without ink. Augusta noticed. Her mouth tightened. Dinner is ready. The procession into the dining room was a lesson in social warfare. Augusta placed herself at one end as if the house still answered first to her. Sebastian took the other. Rosamund was seated to his right by rank, though there had been years when that position had felt more ceremonial and intimate. Tonight it felt like a witness stand without the vulgarity of a court. Silver gleamed. Crystal shone. The soup was served with flawless precision. For 15 minutes, conversation behaved itself. The guests spoke of rain, roads, autumn shooting, and a family from Northumberland who had overpaid for horses. Beneath every harmless sentence ran a second conversation, silent and sharpened. Rosamund ate enough to show steadiness and little enough to keep her senses clear. Sebastian spoke when required, but she felt his attention return to her whenever Augusta's voice grew too sweet. At last Millicent laid down her spoon and sighed. "It must be strange, Your Grace, to sit at this table after preferring another roof." Several guests became very interested in their wine glasses. Rosamund looked at her. "Not strange. Instructive. You find so much instructive lately." Millicent smiled. "One hopes instruction does not come at the expense of duty." Augusta's eyes lifted. Duty is easily misunderstood by those encouraged to think independence is the same as honor. Sebastian set down his glass. The small sound made the nearest footman freeze. Rosamund felt him prepare to speak. She turned her head slightly. Not a warning. A reminder. He saw it and stopped. "My duty has never required the surrender of my good name to another person's convenience," she said. Millicent leaned forward with sorrowful eagerness. "But you must admit, dear Duchess, appearances have been unfortunate. You left Caldermere without explanation. You purchased land against its very boundary. You appeared in public without the ring His Grace gave you. People naturally ask what such gestures mean." "Do they ask naturally?" Rosamund said, "or are they taught where to look?" A brief, cold silence passed. Augusta smiled. "Since you mention the ring, perhaps clarity would serve us all." She lifted one gloved hand. A footman approached with a small silver tray. On it lay the Caldermere sapphire ring. For one instant, Rosamund heard the breakfast room again. The porcelain note. Martin's quick breath. Her own hand shaking once, then stilling. The sight of the ring here, displayed between courses like evidence of a crime, made the room tilt and then sharpen. Sebastian rose halfway from his chair. "Mother." "Sit down, Sebastian," Augusta said softly. "No one is harmed by truth. Truth is not a jewel taken from a private table and paraded before guests." Millicent reached toward the tray with a delicate murmur. Perhaps if her Grace explained, this could all be healed. It's only natural that a wife should regret a dramatic gesture. Sebastian's hand came down on the table, not loudly, but with enough force to stop her fingers before they touched the ring. "You will not handle it." Millicent withdrew as if burned by embarrassment rather than rebuke. Augusta's eyes flashed. "It belongs to Caldermere." "No," Sebastian said. His voice was low. Every person in the room heard it. "It was given to Rosamund. If she returned it, then the question is not whether the house may reclaim it. The question is why she felt it had never truly been hers." The word struck Rosamund beneath the ribs. She did not look at him. She could not afford to. Augusta's expression hardened, and the mask of sorrow thinned to reveal the steel beneath. "How generous you are with language tonight. But your wife did abandon the ring. She abandoned your table. She abandoned the duties entrusted to her by your name." Rosamund reached for her reticule and placed it on the table beside her plate. No one moved. "I did not abandon duty. I refused erasure." Sir Lionel Penrith shifted uneasily. Mrs. Hartley's face softened with something like fierce approval. Augusta's gaze dropped to the reticule. "More papers, Rosamund? Must every discomfort become a campaign?" "No. Only the ones carefully arranged by other people." Millicent laughed faintly. "You speak as though you were a victim of conspiracy." "I speak as someone whose letters were delayed, whose name was used to close a tenant path, whose lawful purchase was questioned by a forged note, and whose ring has just been placed before dinner guests without her consent." The silence that followed was no longer hungry. It was afraid to swallow. Sebastian turned toward her, and in his eyes she saw not surprise, but a contained fury aimed away from her at last. "May I?" he asked. 2 words. Nothing more. Rosamund knew what he meant. "May I speak now? May I stand with you? May I use the authority I should have used sooner?" She inclined her head once. Sebastian faced the table. "Her Grace is not property of House Atherley. She is not a symbol to be managed, corrected, displayed, or replaced at anyone's convenience. While I live, no one in this house will speak of her as though obedience were the measure of her worth." Augusta's face went white around the mouth. "You would shame your mother before guests." "No," he said. "I would stop allowing my wife to be shamed before them." Rosamund looked at the sapphire ring on the tray. For 8 years it had weighed down her hand. Tonight it weighed down the whole room. Augusta lifted her chin with the last weapon she had prepared for this table. Then let the Duchess explain why she cast away her vows. Rosamund reached for the ring, not to wear it, but to take it from the tray. The sapphire was cold against her bare palm. She held it where every candle could find it, and at last the room understood that the next words would not belong to Augusta. Rosamund held the sapphire ring in her palm and felt, with startling clarity, how small it truly was. It had seemed enormous for 8 years, heavy enough to command her hand, visible enough to speak before she did, bright enough to convince rooms that a marriage existed simply because the jewel declared one. Now it rested against her skin like a question made of stone. Around the Caldermere dining table, no one touched a glass, lifted a fork, or pretended interest in the cooling food. Even the footman along the wall had become part of the stillness. Augusta watched from the far end, chin raised, certain that a woman forced to explain her pain before witnesses would either break or sound vulgar. Rosamund did neither. She placed the ring on the white tablecloth in front of her, not gently, not harshly, but with enough precision that every eye followed it. "I did not cast away my vows," she said. "I returned the symbol of a marriage in which my silence had become more useful than my presence." A murmur began and died at once. Sebastian stood at her left, one hand resting on the back of his chair. His face had gone very still. Not empty. Not cold. Struck. Augusta's fan opened with a snap. How poetic. How conveniently impossible to disprove. Rosamund looked at her. Not impossible. She opened her reticule and withdrew the first packet. For 3 years, letters addressed to me were delayed, withheld, or answered without my knowledge. Some concerned charity work. Some concerned tenants. Some concerned Briarwick Hall and my Aunt Elspeth Fairhold's settlement. Mrs. Hartley pressed her fingers to her lips. Sir Lionel Penrith leaned forward despite himself. Millicent's rose-coloured composure tightened at the edges. Rosamund laid the letters beside the ring. This one is from Mrs. Dawlish, whose husband died in winter. She wrote to thank me for coal. I never saw her letter. I did not know she had written. This one is from Aunt Elspeth's former solicitor, urging me to inquire about Briarwick. It was kept from me for 3 years. Augusta's voice lowered. Household correspondence has always been sorted for efficiency. Efficiency is not the same as erasure. Sebastian spoke before Augusta could answer, and his voice changed the temperature of the room. I confirm that these letters were found in the Caldermere secretary room. They should have reached her Grace. Rosamund did not look at him, though the admission moved through her like pain touched by sunlight. Augusta's eyes flashed. You cannot know the reasons every paper was set aside. No, Sebastian said. But I know whose name was made smaller each time it happened. That sentence landed harder than any defense he might have made. It did not save him from fault. It placed him inside it. Rosamund unfolded the forged note from Harrogate Rooms. Then there is this. Charles Vane, seated beside his sister, lost colour at once. Millicent placed a calming hand over his wrist. The gesture appeared sisterly. Rosamund saw the warning in it. This note was used to suggest I bought Briarwick Hall to punish his Grace. It was not written by me. The handwriting imitates mine poorly, but it resembles, in several forms, the hand used in Caldermere household correspondence. Augusta's gaze flicked toward the footman. Are you accusing servants now? I am accusing whoever found servants useful. A small sound moved around the table. Sebastian reached toward the note, then stopped and looked at Rosamund. May I? He asked. She passed it to him. He held it up beside one of the delayed letters, the one where a secretary had written a docket on the back. The capital B is formed the same way. The lower loop of the Y is identical. Whoever wrote this note had access to our correspondence and believed Her Grace's hand could be imitated because no one here had troubled themselves to know it well. The shame in that last phrase was his own. Rosamund heard it. So did the room. Millicent gave a faint laugh, too light for the moment. Surely forged notes and old letters don't explain why Her Grace chose to make a spectacle of leaving. Many wives endure misunderstandings without purchasing neighboring houses. Rosamund turned to her. Many women are praised for endurance because endurance costs others nothing. Millicent's smile thinned. I only mean that Briarwick seems such a deliberate provocation. Briarwick is a lawful purchase from my aunt's separate settlement. Rosamund withdrew the copied boundary paper and the Brinley receipt. It is also an estate someone wished controlled before I learned what it contained. The room leaned closer without moving. This map shows the old eastern path between Briarwick and Caldermere, the shared well, and the boundary agreement between Fairholt and Atherley. The path was closed 3 years ago. Tenants were told it was done at my preference. That was false. Augusta's face had become marble. A tenant path is hardly dinner conversation. It became dinner conversation when my name was used to make cruelty respectable. Rosamund placed Mrs. Dawlish's written statement on the table. Mrs. Dawlish remembers the message. Mr. Alden has records of payments made to Mr. Brinley for boundary advisement. One receipt bears initials matching your Grace's correspondence. Initials, Augusta said, with disdain sharpened to a point. You would disgrace a house over initials and cottage gossip. Sebastian looked at his mother. No. We will disgrace no one. We will reveal what was done, and each person may decide whether disgrace belongs to the truth or to the act. Augusta's hand tightened around her fan. You speak as if you were not head of this family. I speak as if I had forgotten what that required. The word silenced even Augusta. Sebastian turned from his mother to the guests, and Rosamund felt the old room shift under the weight of a duke choosing humility before rank. I failed Her Grace. Not by forging notes. Not by closing gates. Not by intercepting letters. But by allowing a household to grow comfortable treating her wishes as decorative. I mistook her restraint for contentment because it asked nothing of me. That was neglect. It was mine. Rosamund's throat tightened. She had wanted him to understand. She had not known what it would cost to hear him say it before witnesses. Mrs. Hartley's eyes shone openly now. Sir Lionel stared at his plate. The two ladies near Augusta exchanged one uneasy glance that revealed which way county judgment had begun to turn. Millicent, sensing the table sliding away, leaned forward with desperate elegance. This is all terribly moving, of course, but none of it proves the note had any connection to my family. Charles merely read what was given to him. He didn't know the secretary had copied from the Briarwick file. The room froze. Charles made a strangled sound. Augusta closed her eyes for half a second. Rosamund looked at Millicent with sudden, absolute attention. The Briarwick file. Millicent's lips parted. For the first time since Rosamund had known her, she had no prepared expression ready. I meant the file you have shown us. I have shown no file, Rosamund said. Only individual papers. Sebastian's gaze sharpened. How did you know there was a Briarwick file in the secretary room? Millicent rose too quickly. I won't sit here to be interrogated like a criminal. Then sit, Augusta said, very softly. Millicent obeyed, but not before the damage had crossed the table and taken root. Rosamund gathered the papers with steady hands. This dinner has served its purpose. It has shown that the forged note did not fall from the air, that my letters did not misplace themselves, and that Briarwick has been discussed in rooms where I was not welcome. Sebastian turned to the butler standing near the sideboard. Mr. Graves, the Dowager Duchess's secretary is relieved of all correspondence duties at once. Mr. Brinley is to be dismissed from any Caldermere business pending review. No letter addressed to her Grace will pass through any hand except her own or one she appoints. Augusta stood. The diamonds at her throat trembled with her breath. You will not strip me of household authority before guests. I am not stripping you of authority, Sebastian said. I am removing what should never have been yours. Augusta's face changed then. The sorrow vanished. The injured dignity vanished. What remained was colder and more honest. You foolish boy, she said. By morning, every drawing room from York to London can be told that Rosamund has turned son against mother, servant against mistress, tenant against house, and husband against name. Rosamund rose, the ring still lying on the table between them. Then tell them. Augusta's eyes narrowed. Rosamund's voice did not rise. Tell them I asked to read my own letters. Tell them I objected to having my name used against widows. Tell them I bought a house with money lawfully mine. If London finds that scandalous, then London may at last be useful by showing us what it values. Sebastian looked at Rosamund, and there was no pride in his eyes now, no command, no wounded male vanity. There was only the humility of a man seeing the woman he had married after years of looking past her. Augusta lifted the ring from the table and closed her fingers around it before Rosamund could move. You may have papers, she said, voice low enough to chill the room. I still have the name. Then she turned toward the door. And tomorrow, so shall the newspapers. The door closed behind her with perfect softness, but the sound reached every person at the table like a threat sealed in wax. By 10 o'clock the next morning, Briarwick Hall contained more truth than furniture. The drawing-room had been aired since dawn, its faded curtains drawn back to admit a pale Yorkshire light that made every imperfection honest. A crack ran along the ceiling. The hearth smoked unless the screen was angled just so. 2 chairs did not match the rest. Yet Rosamund had chosen this room precisely because it did not pretend. Caldermere Park could turn wrongdoing into ceremony with enough silver and candlelight. Briarwick had no patience for disguise. On the centre table lay the old boundary map, the Brinley receipts, the delayed letters, Mrs. Dawlish's written statement, the forged note from Harrogate Rooms, and Aunt Elspeth's warning folded beneath a paperweight. Beside them sat Mr. Hargreaves from York, spectacles polished, manner grave. Mr. Alden stood near the cabinet with the stiff dignity of a steward who knew his house had finally been asked to speak. Mrs. Dawlish sat close to the fire in her best black dress, hands folded tightly over a handkerchief. She looked ready to face a bishop, a duke, or the end of the world, but not necessarily in that order. The guests arrived in careful waves. Mrs. Hartley came first, with honest concern and no appetite for gossip. Sir Lionel Penrith came because curiosity had become too dangerous to satisfy second-hand. 2 county ladies came because they had dined at Caldermere the night before and understood that silence could now be mistaken for allegiance. Sebastian arrived last before the hour, alone and without display. He paused just inside the doorway as if remembering the first time he had entered Briarwick and found a house that did not belong to him. His gaze went to Rosamund, then to the table, then to Mrs. Dawlish. He bowed to the widow before he bowed to anyone else. Mrs. Dawlish. The widow's mouth softened despite herself. Your Grace. Rosamund saw the gesture for what it was. Not a performance. A repair. Small, insufficient, necessary. She stood beside the evidence table, wearing dark green today, the color of steadiness rather than apology. Her left hand was bare. Augusta had not yet arrived, and the absence of the sapphire ring felt like the last piece of an unfinished sentence. At 5 minutes after 10, the sound of wheels came over the gravel. Augusta Atherley entered with Lady Millicent Vane at her side, both dressed for mourning they had not earned. Augusta's face held the calm of a woman who still believed rank could outlast paper. Millicent looked tired beneath her beauty, as though the night had taught her that a lie could be elegant and still leave fingerprints. Rosamund, Augusta said, taking in the witnesses with a glance. How theatrical. No, Rosamund replied. The theatre was last night. This morning is accounting. Mr. Hargreaves rose. Your Grace, Lady Millicent. I am here at the request of the Duchess of Caldermere to confirm certain documents regarding Briarwick Hall. Augusta did not sit. A solicitor in a drawing-room does not make gossip lawful. Sebastian stepped forward, not ahead of Rosamund, but to her side. No. It makes denial difficult. Augusta turned on him. You would assist in this humiliation? I would end the one that has gone on too long. Rosamund gave him one brief look. Enough. Not gratitude yet. Acknowledgement. Mr. Hargreaves began with the deed. His voice was dry, precise, and mercifully unadorned. Briarwick Hall had been purchased lawfully by Rosamund Atherley, Duchess of Caldermere, using funds settled to her separate use through her late aunt, Miss Elspeth Fairholt. No Caldermere permission had been required. No Caldermere money had been used. Sir Lionel stared at the floor. One of the county ladies whispered, "Separate property," as though the phrase had just become a person in the room. Mr. Hargreaves then placed the old map beside the deed. The boundary agreement was valid, never lawfully revoked, and included the tenant path and shared well. Mr. Alden testified that the gate had been locked after instructions from Silas Brinley, who had acted in connection with Caldermere interests. Mrs. Dawlish stood next, smaller than everyone in the room and somehow harder to dismiss than all of them. I was told Her Grace did not want us near the wall, she said, voice rough but steady. I believed it, then I did not. She had sent coal after my Tom died. A lady who remembers a cold cottage doesn't usually begrudge an old woman a path. Augusta's nostrils flared. Sentiment is not proof. No, Rosamund said. This is. She placed the copied instruction on the table. Attribute the preference to Her Grace if challenged. Avoid written reference to the Dowager Duchess. Augusta's face did not change. That was her mistake. Innocence usually reacts before pride remembers itself. Mr. Hargreaves produced the receipts next. Payments to Brinley. Payments tied to Tukes. Entries linked to debts held against Lord Vane, Millicent's father. Millicent's composure gave way by inches. Her fan lowered. Her breathing quickened. Sebastian's gaze sharpened, but he said nothing. He let the documents do what his authority could not. At last Rosamund unfolded the forged note. Lady Millicent, she said quietly, last night you mentioned a Briarwick file. I had not shown one. Mr. Hargreaves has now confirmed such a file existed in the Caldermere secretary room. How did you know? Millicent looked to Augusta. It was quick. It was enough. Augusta said, do not answer foolishly. Millicent laughed once, thin and broken. Don't answer? You said there would be no consequence. You said everyone would believe she was punishing His Grace, and all I had to do was let Charles read the note. Charles was not present, but his disgrace entered with his name. Mrs. Hartley closed her eyes. Sir Lionel muttered something that sounded very like shame. Rosamund's voice remained calm. Who gave you the note? Millicent's eyes filled, though whether with regret or fear no one could tell. Mrs. Spenlow copied the hand. Mr. Brinley provided the phrase about the boundary. I carried it to Charles. I didn't think it would matter. It was only meant to make her look spiteful. Sebastian said. The word was soft and terrible. Millicent flinched. My wife has a name. The silence after that belonged to him. He turned to the witnesses, and the Duke of Caldermere did what no one in the county expected a duke to do. He lowered himself before the truth. I allowed my household to make Rosamund small because her dignity spared me discomfort. I believed a quiet wife was a contented one. I believed order was peace. I was wrong. I made silence comfortable for everyone but her. Rosamund felt the words move through the room and settle where gossip had been. They did not heal everything. But they broke something that needed breaking. Augusta's face had gone pale with rage. You will regret disgracing your mother for a woman who forgot her place. Rosamund looked at her then, and every year at Caldermere stood behind her without bowing. No, Your Grace. I remembered it. That was the difficulty. My place was never beneath your management. Sebastian faced Augusta. You will remove to the Dower House by the end of the week. Mrs. Spenlow is dismissed from all duties. Brinley will never again conduct Caldermere business. All correspondence belonging to Her Grace will go directly to her. The eastern gate will remain open by written agreement, and any tenant touched for speaking today will have my protection and Briarwick's." Augusta took one step back, not because she was afraid of him, but because the room had ceased to belong to her. "You cannot exile me from my son's house." "I am not exiling you," Sebastian said. "I am ending your government of mine." Millicent covered her face. Augusta did not comfort her. That, more than anything, revealed the nature of the alliance. Rosamund looked at the young woman and felt no triumph, only a hard sadness. "Lady Millicent, your father's debts will not be hidden by my disgrace. Nor will they be worsened by my revenge. I will not seek your social ruin beyond what truth itself has done. But you will not enter Briarwick again unless invited, and you will not speak my name as though pity gives you ownership of it." Millicent nodded, unable to answer. The gathering ended not with applause, but with something more useful. Witnesses approached Mrs. Dawlish. Mrs. Hartley took both of Rosamund's hands and said nothing because words would have cheapened it. Sir Lionel bowed lower than he had ever bowed to her before. Augusta left last, rigid and silent, the sapphire ring still absent from sight. Only after the carriages began to depart did Sebastian approach the breakfast table in the adjoining room, where Briarwick's plain white cloth had been laid for no one in particular. From his coat pocket he drew the ring. "My mother gave it to Graves before leaving Caldermere," he said. "He brought it to me at dawn." Rosamund looked at the sapphire, then at him. He placed it on the table between them. Not in her hand. Not near his. Between. "It is yours only if you choose it," he said. "I won't place it on your hand." The morning light caught the stone. This time, it did not look like a shackle. It looked like a question finally asked properly. Rosamund did not touch it. Not yet. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. "Breakfast tomorrow, Your Grace." "Here." Sebastian bowed his head. "Here," he said. And for the first time, the word sounded less like a location than a promise. Morning came to Briarwick Hall without ceremony. No footman announced the hour in a marble corridor. No dowager's secretary arranged the day before the mistress of the house had risen. The first sound was ordinary and honest, a poker striking coal in the small breakfast room, followed by Beatrice's low instruction to a maid who had placed the teapot too near the edge of the tray. Rosamund stood by the window before Sebastian arrived, dressed in a simple cream morning gown with no jewels at her throat and no ring on her hand. Outside, the fields between Briarwick and Caldermere lay washed in pale light. The old eastern gate stood open. Beyond it, two women from the lower cottages crossed the path with baskets over their arms, walking the shorter road as if a portion of their lives had been returned to them and they meant to use it without apology. Rosamund watched until they disappeared beyond the rise. Only then did she turn to the breakfast table. It was not grand. The cloth was plain, the silver mixed, the china imperfect. A faint crack marked the rim of one plate. On that plate, exactly where Sebastian had placed it the day before, lay the Caldermere sapphire ring. It no longer commanded the room. It waited. That difference made her heart ache more than she expected. At 9, a carriage stopped before the east door. Rosamund heard no bustle, no raised voice, no ducal impatience carried through the hall. Sebastian entered the breakfast room a minute later after being announced by a footman who seemed uncertain whether a duke could be received like any other caller and deeply relieved when Rosamund made no correction. Sebastian wore a dark morning coat, his face tired in a way sleep could not repair. He bowed to her with the same formality he had used in the first days after she left Caldermere, but something beneath it had changed. Formality no longer felt like distance. It felt like care. "Your Grace," he said. "Your Grace," she answered. His gaze moved to the table, then to the ring, then back to her face. He did not ask. He did not even look as if he had a right to ask. Rosamund gestured to the chair opposite hers. "Will you sit?" "If you wish it." "I invited you." He accepted the chair. For a moment, the scene seemed almost cruel in its resemblance to the mornings they had wasted. A man and a woman seated across from one another. Tea poured. Toast cooling. Light touching a ring. Yet nothing was the same. This was her house. He was here because she had asked, not because a name or a vow or a household schedule required it. Beatrice poured the tea herself, then withdrew with the maid and closed the door. Sebastian noticed the gesture. You trust her? I do. I am glad. Rosamund looked at him. Because she served me when others did not. Because you deserved loyalty long before anyone thought to call it service. The words were quiet. They entered the room without demanding forgiveness. Rosamund lifted her cup. Mrs. Dawlish walked through the gate this morning. A faint softness crossed his face. I saw her from the road. Bellamy has the written agreement ready for your steward. The path, the well, and the boundary access are confirmed. No Caldermere agent may close them without agreement from Briarwick. From Briarwick, she repeated. Not from me as your wife. From Briarwick, he said. And from you as its owner. She set down her cup. That matters. I know. You did not always know. He looked at the ring on the plate. No. I knew estate boundaries, rents, drainage, tenants, roads, the order of inheritance, the importance of a name. I did not know the difference between a wife being quiet and a wife being unheard. Or perhaps I knew and did not allow the knowledge to trouble me. That honesty hurt because it did not try to flatter her. What happens to Augusta? Rosamund asked. She leaves for the Dower House tomorrow. Mrs. Spenlow is dismissed with wages enough to prevent cruelty but not enough to purchase silence. Brinley has been informed he will never again act for Caldermere. Mr. Harcourt will send copies of the review to Hargreaves. You will have them before I do, if you prefer. Rosamund studied him. Before you? Yes. That is a great change for a duke. A shadow of a smile touched him and vanished. It is a necessary humiliation. Do not make humility theatrical, Sebastian. His name came more easily this time, though it still altered the air. He bowed his head. I will try not to. Outside, wheels passed in the lane, and a servant's laugh rose briefly from the kitchen court before being hushed. Life had begun again before love had decided what to do with itself. That seemed right. Rosamund folded her hands in her lap. The county will talk. It already has. Mrs. Hartley called at Caldermere before 8 to inform my mother that Briarwick's mistress had restored more Christian feeling in one morning than our household had managed in 3 years. Sir Lionel sent a note so stiff with apology that I suspect his wife dictated it. Lady Millicent has gone with her brother to stay with cousins in Durham. Her father's debts will be handled without your name being used as payment. And London? London may wait. His eyes met hers. For once, I do not intend to arrange our lives according to the comfort of rooms where neither of us is present. Rosamund looked away first, not from fear, but because tenderness was harder to receive than justice. Justice had evidence. Tenderness asked trust to grow where trust had once been starved. I will not return to Caldermere as I was, she said. I know. Briarwick remains mine. Yes. Not as a retreat granted by your goodwill. Not as a pretty project for a bored duchess. Mine. Yes. My letters come here first unless I direct otherwise. My steward answers to me. Any decision touching the shared boundary is made with me, not around me. Yes. She drew a slow breath. If there is to be any marriage between us after this, it cannot be the old one warmed over like yesterday's tea. Sebastian's mouth moved with something that was almost pain. I do not want the old one. I was well served by it. You were not loved by it. Silence followed. Not empty silence. Not the silence of old breakfast rooms where words had gone to die. This one held the weight of a door waiting to be opened from the inside. Rosamund reached toward the plate. Sebastian did not move. His stillness was complete, almost severe, as though he knew the smallest gesture might steal the choice from her hand. The sapphire was cool when she touched it. She lifted it and held it in her palm, feeling the familiar weight without the familiar surrender. When I left it on the plate, she said, I thought I was returning everything you had never truly given me. You were right. Her fingers closed around the ring. No. I was partly right. The ring was given. What was not given was attention. Partnership? Shelter that did not become possession. The right to be believed before I was explained away. I will spend whatever years you allow me learning how to give those things. Years are built from mornings, she said. Not speeches. Then I will begin with mornings. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw not the cold Duke society feared, nor the negligent husband she had fled, but a man stripped of the ease his power had given him and uncertain enough to be truthful. That did not erase the past. It did not need to. Forgiveness, if it came, would not be a curtain dropped over what had happened. It would be a house built with windows open. Rosamund slid the ring onto her finger herself. It passed over the old pale mark and settled there, still a little too large, still unmistakably Caldermere, but no longer alone in naming her. Sebastian closed his eyes for one breath. When he opened them, there was no triumph in his face. Only gratitude, grave enough to be worthy of the moment. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me as if I have returned to you, she replied. I have chosen to meet you here. He looked toward the window, where the open gate showed a narrow line of road between the two estates. Then here is where I will come, as often as you permit. Rosamund extended her hand across the breakfast table. She did it first. His hand met hers gently, not closing over it, not claiming it, only holding as if something precious might still choose to leave and must be free to stay. Outside, the women from the lower cottages returned through the gate with empty baskets and easier steps. Caldermere Park stood beyond them, grand and chastened in the morning light. Briarwick Hall smelled faintly of toast, coal smoke, and new plaster. Rosamund's hand rested beside her teacup, the sapphire catching the sun without weighing her down, while beyond the window the gate between Briarwick and Caldermere remained open.